Chapter 1. Sebastian tore open the package, gazed in delight at the tiny yellow pouch, studied the strings, worked out which one went between his legs and which around his waist, tucked his penis over his scrotum and placed the flimsy bit of material on top. It was slightly elastic, so with judicious pulling and maneuvering he managed to cover the essentials and tighten the strings to hold it in place. Before gazing in awe at himself in the full-length mirror. Cool, he whispered, sharing a complicit grin with his reflection. The only thing he didn't like were the tufts of black hair sticking out round the edges like a fungal growth, so he shaved his pubes, running the razor over armpits as well. If he was going to be smooth, he might as well do it properly. The mirror reflected an image that looked exactly as he'd hoped. Tall, slim, and sleek, the pale gold pouch complementing his olive skin. Sebastian had given up wondering why he hated wearing clothes. He'd always run around naked. At home, encouraged by his mother because it saved having dirty clothes to wash and she thought it was healthy. Until the age of 10 or 11, nudity had been an innocent and unconscious pleasure. Since puberty, however, being naked among other people had become a source of confusion. After a restless night filled with sexy dreams, followed by a never-ending day at school, he cycled to a public swimming pool on the other side of the city to avoid running into kids he knew. There were few swimmers, but the grassed area, stretching about 50 meters towards a diamond wire fence, was jammed with half-naked, mostly overweight bodies sunbathing, picnicking under the trees, or standing around hoping to be admired. Females were scantily clad, males wore bulky shorts from navel to knee. He was going to look like a hummingbird among toads. The thought buoyed him, but to be on the safe side, Sebastian asked the pool guard if it was okay to wear backless togs. The fellow shrugged and pointed out 3 bare-bummed women in thongs, sunbathing while their toddlers played. You couldn't look worse than those great fat arses, he sneered. If anyone complains, I'll tell them to bugger off. He looked Sebastian up and down and asked, you on your own? Yes. We've had a bit of stealing, so put your gear behind the door of my office. He indicated a blue door to the right of the changing rooms. Thanks. I owe you. It's a nuisance having to watch stuff all the time. No worries. The guard moved on. To prevent chaos, those who wanted to swim lengths were only allowed to use the 4 lanes in the center, in one direction, from the diving boards to the changing rooms. They then had to get out and walk back to dive or jump in again. Sebastian bravely wandered along the side of the pool. Pulses thumping wildly, senses acutely aware of wolf whistles from a gaggle of girls, stares of incomprehension from teen-aged boys, and the spotlight gaze of dozens of older men and women. Despite a very audible, fucking exhibitionist, from somewhere near the middle of the sunbathers, he felt more alive than ever before in his life. Proud yet wary. Posture perfect. Determinately nonchalant. Apparently unaware that he was wearing anything unusual. With disarming modesty he walked to the end of the diving board, bounced a couple of times. Then dived neatly in, swimming to the other end and hauling himself out, giving his audience a view of the best buttocks ever to grace the place. The pool guard was standing in front of the office and beckoned Sebastian over. Have you stuffed your pouch? He asked with a grin. Sebastian shook his head nervously, staring at his reflection in the mirror glass window behind the guard. No. Is it rude? Of course not. There's nothing more pathetic than a guy in a pouch with nothing to fill it. You're making me jealous. Sebastian took a quick look at the guard's well-muscled body and grinned. I'm jealous of your physique. The guard laughed, flexed his biceps, winked and wandered away. Against the boundary fence under a gaudy umbrella, a large woman of indeterminate age fixed her eyes on Sebastian as he sauntered to the diving board and did a perfect pike. The next time he walked past she sat up and waved. Sebastian! Sebastian, she screeched, making 100 heads turn first to her and then to the almost naked young man who suddenly wished he was wearing a wetsuit. He recognized her immediately. Massive Martha. Until this year Sebastian had delivered evening papers for her news agency. She screeched again. She'd been his boss for 4 years, so ignoring her wasn't an option. And he realized he didn't want to. This was his excuse to get right in among the crowd. Picking his way between dozens of curious men, mothers, children, and sunbathing teenagers, stepping carefully over bags and towels, he occasionally looked down and winked at eyes glued to his groin. Martha, solid and squat in a black bikini that made no attempt to cover everything bikinis were supposed to, was ensconced on an enormous towel, propping her bulk against the wire of the boundary fence. A profusion of solid flesh, straight gray hair hacked off at the level of her earlobes, aggressive mouth, and determined jaw gave no inkling of the heart of gold she insisted lay beating in the depths of her beefy bosom. She turned to the elderly hippie beside her. Lysander, this fine specimen of manhood is Sebastian. He was my best paperboy. Lysander stood and held out a limp hand. As skeletal and feeble as Martha was robust, his gray hippie ponytail and ridiculous earring made him seem much older than he was, while sagging faded Speedos exaggerated the scrawniness of thighs and buttocks. A warm voice and smile compensated for the wrinkles, so Sebastian took the proffered hand and waggled it about. Sit, Martha ordered, patting the towel between her and Lysander. Sebastian sat, wondering what would be their reaction if the cord round his waist or between his legs broke and his cods burst forth. Lysander is an anthropologist, Martha announced proudly. How nice, Sebastian replied, having not the faintest notion what an anthropologist was. Both adults were staring silently at his pouch. Obeying an urge to display his charms, he leaned back on his elbows. I want to congratulate you, Lysander said in a husky voice, his gaze never wavering from the apparently swelling yellow pouch. Sebastian frowned at the older man. What for? He asked sharply, hoping the fellow was only a voyeur and not expecting to touch the display. One of my fields of study is expressions of male sexuality in different cultures. It's an extension of Margaret Mead's work in the Pacific Islands. Sebastian nodded in incomprehension, relieved that his penis had changed its mind. Did you know that more than half of all Australian men are more or less impotent, and 82% feel insecure about their bodies and sexuality? Sebastian shook his head. This insecurity and inability to achieve an erection translates into anger and depression. Most people don't realize how this, and female reactions to the problem, makes men feel so frustrated and angry it can lead to wife beating and rape. Gosh, Sebastian wondered what this had to do with the present situation. Was the old bugger referring to the fact that his erection had failed to develop? Did you know that boys do much better in single-sex schools than in co-educational schools? Because of this sense of inferiority, Lysander looked up owlishly. No, Sebastian replied, awed that someone had studied such things, still wondering what it had to do with him. I go to a single-sex school. Ignoring the interruption, Lysander plowed on. The recent origins of male self-image problems appeared in the late 1970s, early 80s, when an upsurge of USA fundamentalist Protestant Puritanism decreed that men should hide their thighs with Bermuda shorts. After that, they had to hide their chests with t-shirts. Then they had to hide the shape of their genitals even when swimming with the dreadful board shorts. Lethal things that fill with water, prevent boys from learning to swim properly, and cause several drownings a year. He paused for a much-needed breath. Tar-filled lungs are no use to an orator. Fortunately, my generation was not like that, he continued loudly, looking round to include the dozen or so people nearby who were staring with undisguised curiosity. We wore brief shorts, went bare-chested all summer, swam in bikinis, and were proud of the bulges in our groins. We are the last emotionally healthy generation of Australian males, and I had despaired for the future until I saw you. You are magnificent. You walk confidently, unashamed, proudly exposing the muscles that lifted humans above the other apes. He paused as if for applause. Sebastian was too embarrassed to speak or listen properly, and there were titters from the spectators. If Lysander epitomized sexy manhood in mid-le age, then Sebastian hoped he'd die young. Thanks, I think. But not everyone agrees with you. Someone over there yelled that I was an exhibitionist. Ridiculous, Lysander snorted, causing several more heads to turn. An exhibitionist wants to shock. You are the opposite, you celebrate your youth and manhood. Perverts are people who think men's sexuality should be concealed. He turned and glowered at everyone around him. Repression of natural desires is the reason so many men post naked pictures of themselves on the internet. They daren't do it in public, they aren't brave like you. The moral retards who denounce nudity are too stupid to realize it is their censorship that is creating demand for pornography. Humans are pathetic, he snapped in disgust, then paused and glared at a repulsively fat young fellow in long orange board shorts, biting into a hamburger. I sometimes wonder, he continued after a prolonged coughing spree, if this modern modesty signals the end of civilization. 2,000 years ago nudity was normal. Most indigenous peoples were naked if it was warm enough. The Greeks did all sport naked, he coughed again, while ostentatiously scratching his groin. Which school do you go to? Sebastian stared in horror. The old bugger had an erection. What? He asked, then remembered the question. MT Hermes boys grammar, why, he had to escape these two nutters. Are you a sportsman? I do Greco-Roman wrestling, Sebastian offered. Naked, Lysander demanded. Of course not. But you'd like to. No. It's only me and the teacher. The other guys prefer karate. Several people who were listening to Lysander's nonsense giggled audibly. Sebastian wanted to dissolve. This was not the sort of attention he was seeking. I'm jealous of you, Martha interrupted. I'd love to wander round bare-chested, but haven't your courage. As she was already exposing at least 3 times as much flesh as Sebastian, he thought she was being somewhat greedy. Be a dear and fix my cushion, she demanded, leaning forward. Sebastian got to his knees and adjusted the cushion to better to protect her back from the wires. As Martha lay back, he slipped a loose strap of her bra over a hook-shaped wire protruding from the fence. Too polite to just get up and go, Sebastian gazed towards the pool in desperation and saw a young man in white speedos beside the diving board. I've just seen a friend over there I promised to meet. I've got to go. I feel like a swim too, Martha announced. Pull me up. She extended her hand. Sebastian grabbed it and heaved violently. She careered forward, tumbling onto a young couple immediately in front. Her bra remained on the fence. Pretending not to notice, Sebastian leapt agilely over recumbent bodies to the diving board and confronted the young man. Please pretend you know me and we're friends, he pleaded. I have to escape those people. The young man, who had been wondering how to approach the scantily clad Adonis racing towards him, placed an arm round his shoulders and said, "Only if you kiss me." What? Here. No, underwater. Come on, and he dived in. Sebastian followed and the kiss was brief, but sufficiently crazy to excite him. They surfaced, breathless. Equals I'm Rodney. Equals Sebastian. They swam and lay on the warm concrete as far from Martha as possible, where Sebastian's usual manic desire to communicate soon had Rodney laughing. Equals well, she said she wanted to go topless, he laughed. He was a little surprised when Rodney asked about his school and showed interest in the athletic sports the following week. Pleasure turned to nervous fear when asked if he had a girlfriend. Equals no. Equals a boyfriend. Sebastian's heart pumped. The world stood still. His throat constricted. Was Rodney a gay basher? They were everywhere. Equals no. Equals you're too good looking to be het, are you gay? Equals are you? Rodney just laughed and gathered up his things. Equals look for me at the sports day, I'll come and cheer you on. Sebastian stared after him. Mind a blank. What had that been about? Gay. The word was meaningless to him. Sebastian wasn't ignorant, he'd read magazines, surfed the internet for sexy pictures of guys, knew what the word meant, but it didn't describe him. No single word described him. He was a son and student who loved reading, dancing, singing, acting, sprinting, sunbathing, wrestling, and swimming. He hated team sports and individual competitions. Unless he was sure of winning. He was a bit of a loner and didn't seem to have much in common with most other students. He liked wrestling, but just for the exercise. He enjoyed exams and looking after the few plants in their garden, flowers as well as vegetables. He'd enjoyed woodwork and flower arranging. He'd also made himself a pair of shorts on his mother's sewing machine. He didn't object to girls, just never thought about them. He wasn't sexually attracted to any of the boys at school. Well, one, but he'd never told him and they'd done nothing in the 4 years. Sometimes he wanked when thinking about Mr. Achilles in his lycra wrestling gear. He shook his head to remove the nonsense. Gay didn't describe him. He was just a normal 17-year-old who found a few men sexy. The other kids used gay as an insult, but they also used bung, wog, nig, egghead, and four eyes as insults. So as Sebastian's neighbors were Indians and he liked them, his best friend was a social, super intelligent eco-freak, and the school principal wore glasses to read, he'd always imagined there was no logic in any of the insults. The only girls he saw were usually giggling and whispering on street corners, and none of the girls at the pool today had interested him in the least. Rodney though, he was sexy, and Sebastian wouldn't mind kissing him again. And the guard? He was sort of tough and rough with broad shoulders and a tattoo on his biceps. He was sexier than Rodney. Sebastian entered the office feeling somehow deflated. The guard was standing staring out the window and Sebastian realized he must have been looking at him. Equals is that guy your boyfriend? Equals no, we've just met. Equals he's sexy. Equals not as sexy as you, Sebastian blurted, breaking into a nervous sweat. The guy would probably thump him. One day he'd make a mistake and say something stupid like that to a nutcase with a flick knife, who'd bury it in his chest after hacking off his balls. Equals just joking, he added hastily. Equals great tat, he added, indicating the seahorse tattoo on the guard's biceps. Equals my name's Uri. Equals Sebastian. Equals there's a butterfly on my bum if you wanna see it, the grin was cheeky. A swarm of butterflies were flapping in Sebastian's throat and chest. Equals okay. Ari kicked the door shut, then instead of just pulling down the top of his togs, he pulled them off, tossed them into the corner and twisted to show the tiny butterfly. Sebastian touched it lightly, grinning as another wank fantasy came true. Within seconds his pouch was off and with lips locked in a gentle kiss that Sebastian hoped would never end, they lay on the cool tiled floor and brought each other to orgasm. Equals G, Ari, that was my first time and it was just so great thanks. Equals my pleasure. Come again. Chapter 2. Sebastian was late and Desole worried. It was stupid but she couldn't help herself. She knew the only way to keep her son was to leave him free to be his own man. She was well aware that possessiveness was poison, unsought advice anathema, and negative criticism counterproductive. But when irritated by his increasingly callous insouciance, she found it hard to keep her mouth shut. Recently she'd been feeling as if she was walking among eggs, the slightest false step and disaster would strike and all her plans would come to naught. Sometimes she felt as if she hardly knew her son. She hardly knew herself. Her parents had heaped hellfire and damnation on her for having a child out of wedlock, so they deserved their timely demise. Brakes failed and they sailed off the motorway exit into a quarry. Too old to be driving at 76, the coroner said. No one checked for sleeping pills as it was around midday. The insurance had been very useful, although not as great a windfall as the rent-free, upmarket townhouse with a large and very private courtyard, near the center of the city. It was just the place to bring up a boy who threw off all his clothes when he came through the door. Desole worried about everything. When she wasn't worried, she worried that she should be worrying. Sebastian never seemed to worry. As he told her on numerous occasions, he had a sixth sense and always knew exactly how people wanted him to behave, so he was always the person everyone wished their own son would be, and there were no problems. Simple. Desole had not argued because it was true. Her son was a different person with everyone he met. She knew immediately who he was speaking to on the phone simply by the way he spoke. He could be noisy and tough, soft and gentle, bored and dull, interested and chatty, and everyone imagined this was the real Sebastian. All his teachers in primary school had adored him and said he was popular, and in the 4 years since he started high school his reports had been consistently excellent and his behavior exemplary. So why did she have no motherly feelings for him? Why did she sometimes hope he'd fall on his face? Her few friends with teenage boys said how lucky she was to have such a thoughtful and well-behaved lad. They were at their wits' end. Some had even been attacked by their own sons. Sebastian was 17 and, according to the books, testosterone was raging through his veins, turning him into a sex-crazed, aggressive monster. He was physically an adult male. Did he need a male role model apart from Jack? Tough luck if he did. Desole had no need of a strange male giving her son ideas of premature independence. She had her own plans for him. Jack already had too much of a hold over him. It had taken only 2 years for her to realize she should never have had a child. They were like kittens, adorable when young and dependent, profoundly irritating when they started thinking for themselves, and in Sebastian's case that seemed to happen as soon as he was out of nappies. He'd let loose with ear-splitting tantrums whenever asked to wear clothes. Since deciding on her plan for Sebastian's future, Desole had read every book she could lay her hands on about bringing up children. Her son would have no guilt feelings or embarrassment about sex. She'd read terrible tales about the harm guilt can do. One told of a deeply religious mother who, when she caught her son masturbating, had forced him to put his penis on the table, then stabbed a fork through it. Later in life the young man had become a psychopath and murdered 7 women. Following the most enlightened ideas on child rearing, Desole had rewarded equals good behavior and ignored bad. All humans desire praise and recognition. There's no point in being a little shit if it's ignored. Much better to be a well-behaved, quiet kid who looks before crossing the road if that gets you a hug and an ice cream. It was seldom cool in this tropical metropolis, and she saw no harm in his running around the house naked. Even to school he never wore more than a skimpy pair of shorts. Teachers gave up trying to keep a shirt on him, all agreed he was a beautiful boy and no one complained. As he matured she thought he'd become shy, but he didn't, and was ready to tell any visitors who objected that they had the problem, not him. So far no one had objected. Men had always been a mystery to Desole, a mystery she had no interest in solving. She'd hated her father and grandfather and all her male teachers. The boys at school had teased and tormented her beyond bearing. She had tried to love women, but they turned out to be just as incomprehensible. After 2 years of acrimony, Marion had left her when she refused to have an abortion. Didn't want to live with snotty-nosed kids, especially a male child. Desole's anger at this betrayal was only mollified when her ex-lover fell from her balcony and snapped her neck. Drunk, according to the coroner. Sebastian's 11th birthday had been a triumph, proving her success at raising a child without inhibitions. She'd offered to throw a party but he said he saw the other boys every day at school and didn't want to see them at home as well. In 7 years he had never brought a friend home. He said he had friends, but if so they were kept in a separate compartment of his life. Not that he was secretive or sly. Quite the opposite. Sometimes she wished he were a little more reserved. Your son is attractive, but maniacally garrulous. One unkind visitor had decreed after Sebastian had bent her ears about tadpoles for half an hour. Desole had made a special 11th birthday cake, and he put on a concert. He was a great little actor. Requiring no costumes, of course, and using only his equal's wand, a polished stick in which he had carved symbols, he played every role in a tale about a handsome young prince who battled dragons, wizards, trolls and other weird things, then rescued another young prince and they ruled as joint monarchs. She could still recall the tingle of surprise at how regal her young son looked on his throne. It was indeed magic. He sang 2 songs of his own composition, recited a poem, performed a dance he'd made up based on the ballet they'd recently watched on TV, then made her laugh by popping his penis head in and out of his foreskin. She had been delighted with his innocence, especially when he got an erection and demonstrated how he could use it like a catapult, bending it down, placing a little paper ball on it and letting go. The missiles flew several meters. It embarrassed her to admit it, but her son's penis was the only real one she had seen in her life. Plenty of photographs, of course, but never a real one. Her rapist didn't undress, merely opened his flies and shoved it in. She'd been too shocked to do anything except close her eyes and blank the experience out. The final act of Sebastian's concert had been a gymnastics display. He stood on his head, did cartwheels and handstands, then lay on his back and held his hips high with his hands, his weight on his shoulders. While straining to maintain the pose he explained that when he did this it felt extra good between his legs. Suddenly he groaned loudly and little spurts of semen sprayed over his chest and onto his face. He collapsed, sat up and looked at his penis in concern. Mummy, Willie's got a cold. Look at all the snot. Desole had felt privileged to witness her son's first ejaculation. She had read that Japanese mothers teach their sons to masturbate, but had not dared herself, having no experience. But of course her clever son had worked it out for himself. After absorbing her lavish congratulations and a detailed explanation of what had happened and why, he asked in innocent curiosity. Is that how I was made? A man pushed his willy into you and squirted. Yes, dear. Who was it? I don't know. It was dark and he hid his face. Did you love him? No. I hated him. It hurt and, a determination to be brave dissolved. Desole burst into tears. And, as he had been trained to do, Sebastian consoled her. It was later while burning the video of Sebastian's performance onto a disk that an idea fluttered into her brain, took root, and began to grow. Desole dragged her thoughts to the present and Sebastian's lateness. The previous afternoon he had seemed excited when she arrived home. He'd finished his homework, mowed the tiny lawn, taken a shower, then helped her prepare supper, chatting constantly. Later, when he was sprawled in his chair in front of television, she noticed he had shaved his pubic hair. She said it looked very neat and clean, which it did. Do you want to know why? He asked, lazily stroking his groin. Only if you want to tell me. She knew he was going to. He was in that sort of exasperating mood. She was wary, however. There was something about this careless insouciance that was different, a shift in the power balance. Instead of her setting the pace and itinerary, Sebastian was in control. Normally he would have asked before shaving his armpits and groin. She had to re-establish her authority. Another guest was due soon, and a self-willed Sebastian might be a problem. Sebastian went and fetched a tiny yellow pouch, hung it by its strings on his erection, and dangled it in front of her. So I can wear this at the public pool. Desole fingered the soft, shiny fabric and shook her head. It'll never fit. Not when I'm like this, but when I'm normal. He eyed her cheekily. Wanna see it on? I'll have to release the pressure on Willie first. It had been 2 years since Sebastian had masturbated in front of her. She never mentioned it in case he thought she wanted him to, which she certainly didn't. She was privy to all his sexual experiments thanks to several tiny video cameras Jack had cleverly concealed in her son's bedroom 4 years previously. Sebastian was obviously trying to provoke her, and she didn't appreciate it. At least he hadn't become inhibited. That would really put a spanner in the works. But now wasn't the time to make a fuss, so she squeezed a tight smile and managed not to yawn while he stroked, fondled and caressed himself until a large gob of cum shot over his shoulder to land on one of her satin cushions. Hiding her irritation, she congratulated him on an impressive display, fetched a damp cloth and tossed it to him to clean the cushion and himself. After a quick wipe, he donned the minuscule pouch and paraded, choosing to ignore his mother's lack of enthusiasm. Desole had not the slightest sexual interest in any man, least of all her own son. Her current desire for him to be free of the usual inhibitions sprang from an entirely different set of desires, primarily economic. Since the video of Sebastian's 11th birthday concert, which she had shown to her accountant, photographs and videos of her naked son in an interesting variety of poses and activities had earned her many thousands of dollars, thanks to Jack's contacts with foreign magazines and other people prepared to pay for that sort of thing. As long as her privacy and financial security was assured, Desole did not want to know about that side of the arrangement. She was obviously aware that her son was physically attractive, but she found his charm, smooth bronze skin and obvious fitness irritating rather than seductive. She only wished she could have been so self-assured. Men really were different from women. Increasingly, she felt she would have been happier as a man. To Desole's relief, Sebastian had never shown an interest in girls. Females were far too clever at ensnaring stupid men, and all heterosexual men became stupid when faced with female wiles. Women never lost sight of the main game: money, power, prestige. The employment agency she managed for Mr. Fartbook saw a constant flow of silly young things who thought that simply being a woman was enough to demand respect, love, presents, and the fawning admiration of men. None seemed prepared to put themselves out for others, certainly not for their boyfriends or husbands. To listen to their gossip, you'd think they despised the young men who took them to parties and bought them presents. Adult females were no better. As Edith, a long-time acquaintance, had remarked, if I don't know within 5 minutes of meeting a woman how often her husband wants sex, how good it is and the size of his cock, then she's a lesbian. If the men in their lives knew that their spouses and partners betrayed their personal details to the slightest of female acquaintances, they'd probably suicide. Just this afternoon a very ordinary young lass in the waiting room was regaling a dozen complete strangers with intimate details about her husband's tiny penis that she could hardly feel, his difficulty in gaining an erection, the rash he'd developed under his testicles and the size of his hemorrhoids that popped when the piano she'd asked him to move fell on top of him. To everyone it was a great joke and proved the inferiority of men. Desole hoped Sebastian would be gay, she wouldn't be able to tolerate another female in the family. Once had been enough. She liked the word, gay. He was usually happy and gay. However, he still never brought anyone home. Went to the pictures and bushwalking with a friend on weekends and was always talking about what a great guy his wrestling teacher was, but he wasn't a friend, thank goodness. Friends can be nosy and demanding. The front door slammed. Desole relaxed. Sebastian was home. A few seconds later he burst into the room, gave Desole a wave and ran off to shower. For several months Sebastian had suspected his mother had secrets, that she wasn't honest with him. Increasingly he'd realized there was something very odd about their relationship and the way he'd been brought up. As he'd grown older the similarities between his life and that of other guys his age had shrunk, and differences grown. Emotionally and socially his peers already seemed like old men, riddled with inhibitions about what they could and couldn't do, say, think, believe. Their futures appeared to be inscribed indelibly on both their and their parents' hearts. Get a steady job, be respectable, marry a suitable girl, breed 2 or 3 children, work till 65, retire and die in a nursing home. They seldom questioned anything political or social, wore whatever was in fashion, got drunk on weekends, and thought it was sissy to enjoy reading, singing, dancing, talking and chatting. Cars, football, cricket, and rating the sexiness of girls walking past, were the topics of conversation. They told their parents nothing, for there was nothing to tell. Sebastian told Desole everything because in the telling he sorted out his ideas, values, and hopes, and her reactions gave him an insight into her mind, a mind he was beginning to suspect was not as he had been led to believe. I met Massive Martha at the pool, Sebastian began while they were doing the dishes, and he was a great storyteller and they laughed at Martha's debut as a topless bather. Desole hid her irritation at his meeting a young man who was going to watch Sebastian run at the school athletic sports. He hadn't even told her it was on, or that he was likely to win the 100 meters. Her brain drifted off while Sebastian regaled her with a deliberately unnecessarily detailed account of his dalliance with the handsome pool guard. Goodness, Desole smiled tightly. How nice. She blew her nose then burst into tears. I'm happy, Sebastian. Really, darling. So happy for you. I just hope you know what you're doing, sex with strangers can be dangerous. I know you can tell a person's character in the first nanosecond, whatever that is. I just want you to live a few years longer, that's all. Sebastian looked at his mother. She was good, he gave her that. The tears looked real. She wanted him to live longer to look after her, that's what it was all about. Well, she'd brought him up to be independent, and independent he would be. By the way, darling, Desole sniffed while patting her eyes, Mr. Fartbook rang to see if we'd take another guest next Friday. I said if he was as pleasant as the others, there was no problem. He assured me he was. Are you fine with that? Sure, why not? Sebastian shrugged as if it was of no consequence. This was another thing that had been bugging him lately. All those young homeless guys his mother's boss dumped on them for a few days or a week. Apparently people were streaming up from the south to laze on tropical beaches, but when their unemployment checks stopped they were abused, assaulted, and even Abducted. Mr. Fartbook was a benefactor. If he heard of such a case he'd rescue him, have him repaired and checked for bugs and diseases, bring him to Desolles to recover his sanity and looks, then when he was presentable and stopped bursting into tears every 5 minutes, he'd find work for him. Sebastian did not like Mr. Fartbook. He was overweight, had too many chins, smiled too much, had clammy hands and, despite a drenching of cologne, smelled sour. The guests were always potentially good-looking young men about the same age as Sebastian. Desolles was well paid for her trouble and the visitors assisted with house cleaning and cooking, which pleased Desolles who hated housework. Complaints about wearing no clothes soon stopped when they were told they were free to go back on the streets. Desolles' house was large but had only 2 bedrooms, one at either end. Sebastian's was huge, with a desk and armchairs, an ensuite bathroom and dressing room. French doors opened onto the patio and garden, and a gigantic 4-poster bed, the sort usually seen in raunchy, romantic French period films, dominated one end. The weekend before the first guest had arrived, Desolles prepared the way by arranging for 15-year-old Sebastian to meet her accountant, Jack, a youthful-looking 31-year-old who could easily pass for Sebastian's brother. Slightly less than average height, Jack was tough with a muscular, sun-dried body, and thinning hair. Fighting had donated a broken nose and prominent ears, features that added interest to an otherwise plain countenance. A beguiling smile assisted in the manipulation of others, but Desolles worried Sebastian would see through his superficial charm and refused to cooperate. Having been told to expect Jack to be there when he arrived home from school, Sebastian had peered through the French doors at a man sunbathing by the pool. He was used to being the only naked person in the house and felt irritated. He studied the fellow, unable to decide if he was angry or interested. He still hadn't decided when he wandered out and introduced himself. Jack stood and Sebastian was pleased to see he was a few centimeters taller than his visitor, who appeared shy and diffident. Jack's arms, chest, groin, and legs were sprinkled with short brown hairs. Not like an animal, though. Muscular definition was clear. The effect was sexy and Sebastian wondered what it would feel like to stroke him. Normally, Sebastian's knack of putting people at ease meant that within a few minutes whoever was basking in his attention imagined he was the friend they'd been searching for all their lives. For Sebastian, though, it was but a game that wasn't working this time. Jack appeared. Impervious to Sebastian's chatter and charms, remaining politely impassive. In a last-ditch effort to make the muscled runt take a shine to him, Sebastian asked if, seeing he was an accountant, he would help him with his maths homework. Jack shrugged pleasantly and trailed the young man to the bedroom, gazed vaguely around and asked if the bed was as comfortable as it looked. Sebastian told him to try it. Jack neatly folded the cover down and sprawled over the sheets. Equals there's enough room for several people in this bed. Equals yet. Equals you'd never know the other person was there. Equals I would. I like to sleep alone. Equals so you can wank. Equals yes. Equals it's more fun to share. Equals wanking. Equals lying on a bed with someone. Equals doubt it. Jack patted the bed. Equals try it and see. Curious, but unwilling to seem like an obedient puppy, Sebastian shook his head. Equals frightened I'll bite. Reluctantly, Sebastian lay on the edge of the bed. Jack bounced up and down, making Sebastian roll towards the center. Then Sebastian bounced. And they ended up lying side by side laughing, thighs touching. Sebastian suddenly didn't like it anymore, but Jack felt playful and shoved Sebastian off the bed. Sebastian's wrestling skills apparently surprised Jack, who found himself on his stomach, one arm up his back, Sebastian astride, demanding submission. At that moment, Desolles, who had been watching on the monitors, came in and plonked herself down in an armchair. Equals oof. It's great to be home. The traffic was horrendous. You've met, I see, that's excellent. Are you staying to dinner, Jack? Jack hesitated. Equals yeah, stay, Sebastian insisted. Equals you haven't helped me with my maths homework yet. During the meal Jack told them about a great spot beside a river a few kilometers inland, and invited Sebastian to go camping with him that weekend. Sebastian failed to hide his pleasure. A two-man tent was erected, they stripped and sunbathed while Jack talked about the history of the area, then they clambered up a steep rocky escarpment for a view over the plains. The river was full and they swam in a series of deep holes scoured out between giant granite boulders. A whirlpool dragged Sebastian under. He surfaced and grabbed a lungful of air and water, but the rock was too smooth and slippery to grasp. He sank, surfaced again and took another mouthful of water. As if in a dream he could see the bank and Jack standing with his back to him. Down for a third time. No panic, merely resignation. He was going to drown. The realization was oddly relaxing and he released the air in passive acceptance of his fate. Suddenly a strong hand grabbed at his hair, hauled him out and held him upside down. The water gurgled from his throat and he coughed violently. Jack laid him on his side and stroked his head. Equals lucky you've long hair, Seb. Sebastian was shivering violently from cold and a sudden fear that seemed to clutch at his belly. Jack placed him gently on the sleeping bags in the tent, lay beside him and wrapped them both in a blanket. After several minutes of gentle massage, stroking and comforting words, the shaking stopped and Jack unwrapped himself. Sebastian was relieved. Later, Jack taught Sebastian how to spot dangerous currents, apologized for not warning him. And, courage restored, they swam again and enjoyed the rest of the weekend. On the way home Jack brought the incident up. Equals you okay after your brush with death? Equals yeah. Sure. Thanks to you. Equals we don't tell Desoul. Equals no, she'd have kittens. Equals that's right, but it's more important than that. Always bear in mind that it is stupid to tell people about your woes and problems, accidents, and fears. Not because you're ashamed of them, but because it gives them ammunition. Sometime in the future, you never know when, someone will want to hurt or damage you and they'll use the information you carelessly let slip against you. It's the way of the world. Trust no one, keep your secrets, and you'll not get hurt. Sebastian thought for a bit. Equals yeah. I can imagine several kids at school who'd love to sneer at me for nearly drowning and having to be rescued. Thanks. Good advice. Equals well, here's some more. The young man who's coming to stay with you has suffered far more than you. He was kicked out of home, hitched north, was seriously beaten up, then locked blindfolded in a room for a week. He was on the verge of madness when Mr. Fartbook found him. Equals why did someone do that? Equals no idea. The point is, what did I do to calm you after your near drowning? Sebastian blushed. Equals you cuddled and stroked and massaged me. He blushed and added, equals we were naked and I got a hard on, but you ignored it as if it was normal and that made me feel it was okay. Equals why did I do it? Equals to make me feel safe. Equals right. And believe me, the young man who's coming to stay with you is going to need a great deal of that sort of attention. Can I trust you to give it to him if you think he needs it? No embarrassment, just make him feel safe. Equals as long as he's clean and isn't covered in sores. Sebastian looked at Jack who wasn't smiling. Equals that's very wise. Your own health must always come first. But I assure you he isn't. He's been in hospital for a week where he was checked for diseases, sanity, and drugs. He's clean and healthy. But emotionally scarred. He needs a week with someone sane like you before starting work. Equals he's got a job. Equals yes, Fartbook's arranged it. Equals I don't like that man. Equals well, don't tell him that. He's. Equals what? Equals nothing. So, are you going to do the job properly? Equals yes. I'll look after the guy for you. Equals no. You'll do it because it is the right thing to do. Sebastian blushed again. Equals yeah. Okay. I understand. Neil had been a little older than Sebastian, but leaner, taller, less sure of himself. Not bad. Looking if he stopped that nervous twitch of his nose. Fartbook was standing beside him in the entrance hall. Neil was wearing a short toweling dressing gown and looked embarrassed. He had good calves. No sores. Desol invited Fartbook to stay for dinner, but he shook his head brusquely. He turned to go, then swung back and held out his hand. Equals the gown belongs to the hospital. Reluctantly, Neil removed it and handed it over, then held his hands in front of his groin. Embarrassed. An upwelling of sympathy for the young man coursed through Sebastian's young veins, so he put an arm round Neil's shoulders and led him to the dining room, telling him gently not to be embarrassed. He had a great body and Desol was friendly and relaxed. The meal was tasty. Sebastian chattered constantly about life's banalities, and Neil relaxed sufficiently to fall asleep in front of the TV. Sebastian woke him gently and led him to the bedroom where a second bed had been placed a meter from Sebastian's. He tucked Neil in and settled into his own to read. All was peaceful until the lights went out. Neil sat up shrieking. Sebastian turned on his light and raced over. Neil sat, rigid on the edge of the bed. Shivering. Equals sorry, I spent too long in the dark, Sebastian took the unprotesting guest to his own bed, left the light on and massaged him until he fell asleep. That was the pattern for the first 3 nights, so the spare bed was removed and Desol got some fine videos for her collection during the rest of the week. During the day, Neil spent time with Jack, telling Sebastian it was just boring stuff. Sebastian didn't probe. That had been 18 months ago. Sebastian let his thoughts drift over the events of the last few days, and his suspicions about his mother and the bizarre setup grew. He didn't believe she didn't know who had raped her, but it was impossible to broach the subject without a screaming tantrum. It remained a festering sore in his heart. He had a right to know who his father was. He had no idea what he would do if faced by the man who had forcibly squirted semen into his mother, but it would be memorable. Kill him? No, too easy. He wasn't jealous of his school friends for their fathers. They seemed cold, irritable, and unfriendly. One guy in his economics class often had red welts on his legs thanks to a length of electricity flex wielded by his loving father. When he thought about it, which was increasingly often, he was pleased to have only one parent to irritate him. He wondered if he'd see Ari the pool guard again. He'd been so proud to be Sebastian's first sexual partner. That little white lie had given pleasure to all 9 of the guests who had slept in his bed since Neil. It was strange, though, that although they'd all promised to keep in touch, none had. Desol said it was normal, that was how humans were. Never to be trusted. But this was yet another mystery that rankled. Another thing that needed explanation. What had happened to those guys? Chapter 3. The opinions of massive Martha's scrawny anthropologist tumbled around in Sebastian's head. All weekend. On Monday he waited till lunchtime and approached the principal as he wandered the grounds, checking for smokers. Mr. Noel was a lean and handsome man of 64, not at all impatient for retirement, being one of those rare people who truly love their work. A distracted frown, brusque manner, and clipped speech preserved his sanity by deterring self-important pettiness, while amusing his few true friends. He was a scrupulously impartial observer of both teachers and pupils and, with the invaluable assistance of his wife's daily spying through binoculars from their veranda, knew more about them than they did themselves. Mr. Noel was unashamedly human and accepted with equanimity both his and other people's faults along with any virtues. Wisely, he seldom put anything in writing and thus managed to avoid failures. Success, on the other hand, was a burden he was always prepared to shoulder. Mt. Hermes boys' grammar was one of the few socially successful results of the government's support for private schools. Whereas most of these so-called educational establishments had become examination factories and grooming grounds for organized religion, Mt. Hermes was belligerently secular and broad in outlook. Situated in the heart of the most prestigious of the city's garden suburbs, its astronomically high school fees ensured that only the obscenely wealthy had access to its small classes, cutting-edge electronics, science, art, and everything else. While other schools were touting for business and becoming co-educational to increase profits, the extremely well-heeled parents of Mt. Hermes did not think it necessary to share their fortune with less favored families. 132 pupils was just about right, the school committee reckoned. Sebastian had never questioned how his mother, the manager of a small, downtown employment agency, could afford the fees. On the odd occasion when he'd pondered the question, he assumed she had inherited money. The principal had taken an instant delight in the shirtless and inquisitive 13-year-old who, unaccompanied by an adult, had registered for classes on the first day. Normal procedures requiring parental presence had been waived on presentation of a brief note from Desole claiming sickness and a check for his first 2 years' instruction. This colossal amount of money would earn multi-bucks for the school's general purposes fund, so was gratefully and unquestioningly accepted. Sebastian recognized a kindred spirit in the principal and they had become clandestine friends. Clandestine, because Mr. Noel guarded his personal privacy as assiduously as he ferreted out the secrets of others. Not that he had the slightest objection to teachers becoming friends with pupils. Quite the reverse. He deplored any tendency of staff and pupils to consider themselves on opposite sides of the educational fence. It was his opinion that teachers, in their search for knowledge and wisdom, have as much to learn from pupils as pupils have from them, so placing themselves on pedestals is counterproductive. The respect he enjoyed was such that he was trusted to act like a benign dictator, hiring only male teachers who were in agreement with his philosophy. Mr. Noel watched his protégé approach and bestowed a rare smile. Sebastian's responding grin enlivened the principal's day. Sir, I was talking to an anthropologist recently who said too much modesty was dangerous for society. His justification. Sebastian outlined Lysander's arguments. Mr. Noel considered them and grunted, makes sense. The school pool's private, so why do we have to wear togs to swim? You don't. We don't. We didn't when I was a student here. It's as your anthropologist acquaintance said, idiotic. Middle-class morality. The sneer on the words middle class was worthy of a great actor, which, like all good teachers, Mr. Noel was. Over the years, principals gave in to parents' increasingly puritanical notions about nudity and sin, so by the time I took the reins it was a fait accompli and everyone wore clothes when swimming. Mad. On the other hand, it will amuse you to know that there's no rule saying students must wear clothes at all at school. Sebastian looked his astonishment. The Parents' Association when I first took over was full of snags, sensitive New Age guys who decided to abolish school uniforms. They were not expert law writers, so the appropriate school rule simply says, and I quote, from the date of this meeting, clothing for both pupils and teachers is optional. I realized at the time that it didn't say what they intended, but as a dedicated weekend nudist myself, I happily signed it into the school rule book. His self-satisfied smile made Sebastian laugh. Equals brilliant. So I can swim naked this afternoon. Equals if you want. Equals and I can go to class nude. Equals except for a few wet, cool days, you have never worn more than running shorts and sandals in the 4 years you've graced this establishment. I don't think you even own a proper shirt. Do you really want to plunk your naked bum on seats other boys have been farting into? Equals no thanks. But how about at the sports next week? Equals no, that's a public place on that day, so you have to obey state laws which demand you cover your bits. Equals pity. But at least I can swim naked. Should I warn Mr. Sprague? Equals why, the principal's smile was sly. Equals what time is your swimming class? Equals last period. Equals damn, I forgot my togs. Sebastian was searching through his knapsack in the changing room. Equals to hell with it, I'll go naked. Equals you wouldn't dare. Equals wanna bet, he stripped. Equals fuck. You've shaved your pubes. Equals like it? The cheeky response got a laugh and no one dared comment further in case someone thought they were queer. Mr. Sprague stared at the 23 young men lined up on the side of the pool and was about to give instructions when he noticed Sebastian. Equals Sebastian, where are your togs? Equals forgot them, sir. Equals then you can't swim. Equals but. Equals no buts. At that moment the principal bustled into the pool area, apparently unaware that he'd dropped a folder by the gate. Equals old man Noel's here, Seb, someone whispered. Equals now you're for it? Ignoring the students, the principal walked briskly up to Mr. Sprague, stopped and rifled irritably through the bundle of papers he was carrying. Equals damnation. Where's that? He swung round, saw the dropped folder in the gateway, turned to Sebastian and snapped, Equals get that folder and be quick about it. Sebastian ran and picked it up, returned at a sprint and handed it to the principal, who barely nodded before turning back to the swimming teacher. Equals Mr. Noel, sir, one of the students called. Equals Sebastian's naked. Mr. Noel turned, studied the fellow and with testy tongue hissed, Equals Crookshank, speak when you're spoken to. And what are those things you're wearing? Equals my togs, sir. Equals togs? They're death traps. Great bags of material that fill with water and would drown you if you fell overboard. He gazed around venomously. Equals the only boys I see who are ready for swimming are Charles and Reginald in their speedos, and Sebastian in his skin. The rest of you look ridiculous and would drown if caught in a rip. Silence. Equals you disagree. Silence. Equals I'll prove it. You'll each swim one length in your baggies, and a second length nude. No. Cheating by deliberately slowing down on the second lap. Shocked mutters and no one moved. Equals you get changed in front of each other for all sports, the pool is private, what's the matter with you men? That was the smart word, men. As equals men they dared. Mr. Sprague irritably produced another 3 stopwatches for Sebastian, Charles, and Reginald. And, as Mr. Noel predicted, the lap times when swimming naked were markedly superior. Furthermore, what everyone thought but no one admitted, swimming was not only easier but also more fun, and the water felt great flowing past groins and thighs. When the students were told to spend the remaining time swimming lengths because Mr. Noel had to speak to their teacher, no one put on their baggies. Equals what did you want? Mr. Sprague sounded truculent as they walked towards the office. Equals I wanted to tell you that you're a fine teacher, but so bad-tempered and unpleasant you're causing stress to both staff and pupils. Therefore, I think it is time for you to find another school. Equals you can't. Equals I can. Unless. Equals unless. Equals you're 28, Mr. Noel stated apropos of nothing. If he was surprised by this change of tack, the PE teacher didn't show it. Equals 26. Equals bad temper makes you look older. No wife. No girlfriend. Mr. Sprague clamped his mouth shut. As if unaware of mutiny brewing, the principal continued blithely. Equals who's the best kid out? There, indicating the pool. Without hesitation Mr. Sprague snapped, equals Charles. Equals Charles is the pool and gymnasium monitor and you spend a great deal of time alone with him. During and after school. It is obvious that you like each other. Furthermore, Charles hangs on your every word and gesture. He wears Speedos exactly like yours and cuts his hair the same way Mr. Noel smiled benignly and asked gently, equals is your relationship sexual? Equals no, exploded Sprague with such force the swimmers looked up. Equals why on earth not, Mr. Noel asked as if shocked. Equals the lad's not a minor, and you're both obviously crazy about each other. Equals but that would be. Are you telling me I should? Sprague spluttered. Equals are you stupid as well as unpleasant? It wouldn't be unusual. I had an affair with my Latin teacher when I was Charles's age. She was petite and wore 6-inch heels. Quite the best thing that had happened to me until then. Set me on the path to happiness. Equals how do you know these things? Equals I've a third eye. Equals why don't you mind your own business? Equals it is my business to care for staff, pupils, and school, so I need to know everything relevant. Charles, worried that his mentor might be in trouble, got out of the pool and hovered indecisively as if ready to come to his hero's aid. He was a tall fellow, solidly built, swimmer's shoulders, close-cropped light blonde hair, blue eyes, and a determined mouth. Not handsome, but then neither was Sprague. Youth and fitness were their strengths. Equals so here's my ultimatum, the principal continued calmly. Equals take Charles to bed and do whatever makes you both happy. If after a few days of this you change from a bad-tempered oaf I want to get rid of, to a pleasant young teacher, then you can stay. However, as you obviously realize, the experiment demands absolute discretion. As far as I know I'm the only one who has divined your relationship, and while Charles is a pupil it must remain a secure secret. Agreed. Mr. Sprague remained speechless so the principal beckoned Charles. Equals Charles, how much do you like Mr. Sprague? Charles's eyes grew round and moist as he gazed in abject fear at the principal. With his retroussé nose he looked like a sentimental pig. Equals very much, I think, Mr. Noel said with a gentle smile. Equals yes, sir, the lad whispered. Equals well, he has just confessed that he feels exactly the same about you, so after the lesson I want you to wait for Mr. Sprague in his office and he will explain the situation. What he has to say is very personal so I hope you will not be shy. Equals no sir. Equals good lad. The following afternoon, buoyed by the knowledge that, technically, clothes at MT Hermes grammar were optional, Sebastian decided to broach the subject with Mr. Achilles, his wrestling teacher. When karate classes had taken over the gymnasium and with it all the other wrestling hopefuls, Achilles and his sole remaining pupil had cleared 120 years of junk from a surprisingly large room under the main stairs, cleaned the drain of the small wash basin, placed a couple of rubber mats in the center, put a Yale lock on the door and created a private and perfect space to wrestle as long as they remembered where the stairs were and didn't bang their heads. Equals Mr. Achilles, we're doing Greco-Roman wrestling, right? Equals sort of. Equals they wrestled naked. Equals they also punched, kicked, grabbed hold of their opponent's balls, gouged eyes, and tried to kill each other. Equals did they? Equals what? Equals kill each other. Equals sometimes. Mainly during intercity games. Equals but, with the boys and young men in the gymnasium it wasn't like that. Equals no. Equals and they were naked. Equals all sports were done in the nude. Equals then so should we. Equals okay. Equals you agree, Sebastian's surprise showed. Equals your swimming pool escapade is the staff room gossip topic of the week. Mr. Noel clearly supports you, so why shouldn't I? But first I'd like to know why you like to bear all. You cycle to school in nothing but shorts and sandals, and that's what you wear all day, every day. I've never seen you wear a shirt or long trousers. You now swim naked in the school pool, even at the lunchtime free for all today. And a young man who sounds very much like you was swimming at the public pool on the other side of town wearing nothing but a tiny yellow pouch. Equals who saw me, Sebastian demanded. Equals my cousin is a pool guard there. Equals with a seahorse tattooed on his shoulder and a butterfly on his bum. Equals the seahorse, yes. I've no idea what he's got on his buttock. How do you know? Sebastian just grinned and changed the subject. Equals you wonder why I like being naked. It feels good. Not to be deterred, Achilles persisted. Equals what did you and Ari do? Equals why? Equals he has a wife. Equals that's his problem. As for being naked, Sebastian continued determined to get off this potentially hazardous topic. Equals I think I also want to test people. Equals test them. Equals yeah. People seem to like me, but will they also like me if I'm doing something most people don't do? Something that is considered weird or rude, like running around naked. Equals so you want people to like you. Equals not really. After all, I don't like many people, so why should they like me? It's just fun doing things to make them like me and then seeing how far I can go before they drop me. Equals has anyone ever dropped you? Equals no, and that's odd, don't you reckon? Equals not really, it's just that they don't see you as competition, you're too different. Equals as in strange, ugly, deformed, abnormal. Equals as far as looks go you could never be called handsome with that large hooked nose and hooded eyes, one slightly lower than the other. On the plus side you've a strong jaw and an amused mouth. Good thick hair. Slippery eyes. Equals slippery? What's that supposed to mean? Equals it means you're impossible to pin down. For example, at the moment I can't tell if you're serious or having me on. Most people's eyes give them away, but you keep people guessing. I think that's part of your charm. Equals so I'm charming. Equals only in the sense of casting a spell. It has something to do with your energy and enthusiasm, the way you involve people when talking to them, I don't know. Your individual bits are nothing to write home about, but the sum of the parts is a winner. I've watched teachers and kids talking to you. They don't really listen, they just watch you and smile as if mesmerized. And if you haven't put a spell over Mr. Noel, then my name's not Conia's Achilles. Equals we're friends. Equals sure, a 17-year-old pupil and a 64-year-old principal who lets him do whatever he wants. Equals having demolished my face, how about the body? Equals you'd never win a bodybuilder competition, but you're lean and firm with a permanently tanned, satiny skin. You're obviously fit and strong. Good shoulders and slim hips. Excellent legs, tight bum and gigantic balls. Equals you've noticed. Equals it looked as if you were wearing water wings between your legs in the pool at lunchtime. Equals does that mean you like me? Equals do you care? Equals yes. Equals I like you enough to keep wrestling. Equals would you still like me if you knew I got a sexual thrill thinking about wearing my yellow thing in public, swimming naked at school, and wrestling naked with you? Equals I'd assumed that would be the case. After all, the only things you don't normally expose are your genitals, so it must be a thrill to expose them. Equals it's only thinking and planning that's sexy. While I'm doing something it just feels completely normal. Not sexy at all. I wasn't thinking of having sex with you, by the way, just wrestling. Achilles was silent and Sebastian wondered if he was disappointed at not being considered a potential sex partner. Too bad. If he wanted sex then he had to be a bit more like his cousin. There was, of course, much more to Sebastian's behavior than he was prepared to divulge, or even realized himself. Apart from school he had led a solitary, lonely life, the only visitors to their house being adult strangers who usually took no interest in him. To compensate for real friends he had devoured books, starting with the Grimm brothers and advancing swiftly through junior adventure to strong adult stuff, especially quality crime fiction. Recently, his life had been enhanced by the wondrous manic violence and cutting social commentary of Christopher Bruckner's books, and of course the internet where he swapped ideas and dreams with hundreds of people on forums. When he was 12 he'd argued with a teacher about meaning and purpose in life, so the well-intentioned fellow lent him a book on Western philosophy that he read with increasing dismay. All the purportedly wise men based their arguments on the premise that humans are perfectible, ignoring our evolutionary animal instincts, and accepted without question the existence of a supernatural perfect being. The precocious young lad had already rejected both assertions as silly after discussions with his mother and a few older men who took the trouble to talk with him. Good fiction writers, on the other hand, reveal the true character of humans, complete with their avarice, fear, cruelty, and lack of empathy for their fellow humans when things are going badly. Fictional heroes, despite having been born with the same instincts and faults as everyone else, usually manage to lift themselves above the common herd and be brave, decent, honest, just and merciful. An astute observer of other humans, Sebastian had become increasingly contemptuous of the difference between the behavior of most people he met, and the fictional characters he admired. Where were honesty, strength, endurance, generosity, and gentleness? Who bothered to take care of their bodies? Why were most of the people he met overweight, unfit, fearful of difference, terrified of doing anything unusual or saying what they thought? They didn't even dare to stick up for themselves, preferring to sacrifice their individuality to be accepted by a group, while despising their submission to fear, because fear is the killer of joy. He understood that caution and respect for danger is essential, because foolhardy daring results in disaster. Inevitably, he had developed a healthy scorn for those who believed in omnipotent heroes, invisible gods and all other such fictions. Do you often have sex with strangers like Ari? Achilles demanded brusquely, interrupting Sebastian's reverie. He dragged his thoughts back to the present. Sorry, sir, what was that? Achilles repeated the question. Sebastian's grin was cheeky. Only if they're sexy or it's my duty. Duty. When has it ever been your duty to have sex with strangers? Calmly Sebastian outlined the arrangement he and his mother had with Mr. Fartbook. So you see, it's a form of therapy for them and they're all nice guys so it's no penance. The silence became oppressive so Sebastian continued. Jack, the bloke who brings them, explained it like this. For the first 200 or 300,000 years humans lived in small family tribes. The men would sometimes be away for days or weeks and would sleep with each other. Once you've been fucked by or have fucked your friends, you knew they found you worthy and you were bonded. For the women it was the same. Today, it's been declared wrong for men to bond like that so they're going off the rails. These guys who come to us have lost all sense of self-worth, so by enjoying intimacy with another man their self-respect is restored to the primeval state and they can move on. One should never rape though. That's deeply wounding, whereas consensual sex is healing. What about you? It's a real ego trip to know that a strong, healthy person likes you enough to let you kiss, cuddle, and so on. What about disease? Equals Mr. Fartbook has a private hospital and I get checked every month, and so do the guys who stay. His doctor says I'm the healthiest person he's ever examined. So you've no worries on that score. How about you and your girlfriend? Both infection-free? I guess I ought to know before we wrestle naked, just in case. Achilles sat back in astonishment. Instead of the student being on the back foot after his confession, it was the 27-year-old teacher who felt like an incompetent old fuddy-duddy. The lad was brilliant. Equals she's my fiancée, not girlfriend, and I've no idea. I simply assumed she was clean. As far as I know, she doesn't sleep around. Equals do you? Equals not since I gave her a ring 6 months ago. Equals did she give you one? Equals no. Achilles wondered why he suddenly felt cheated. It was Sebastian's turn to leave a weighty silence that went on so long Achilles felt obliged to break it. Equals why have you been so honest? Sebastian grinned. Equals perhaps I'm trying to shock you to see if you still like me. Equals I think it would be impossible to dislike you. Do you wear clothes at home? Equals never. They're constricting. Mum also prefers it. She's only nice to me when I'm naked. Even then she isn't really nice. I'm pretty sure she hates me. He stopped in surprise. Why had he said that? But it was true, he realized. Equals I'm sure she doesn't, Mr. Achilles said quietly. Equals she used to like me, I think. But things changed after I started wanking. She said it was perfectly normal, but somehow the way she behaved with me after that was different. Equals disapproving. Equals no. Not at all. Quite the opposite. She was always encouraging me to do it. Told me it was the best way to grow strong and healthy and I should do it as often as possible in bed before sleeping. Once I managed 7 times, and when I told her she gave me $100 to do with as I liked. And sometimes when we're going to have special visitors she makes me practice my dance routines and perform for them. Equals naked. Equals of course. It's not really dance, it's more like gymnastics to music. I have this final sequence. When I raise my arms high then bend backwards till my fingers touch the floor, I'm very flexible, then I strain every muscle, especially my abs. This causes an erection, and after a minute or so I ejaculate. I've practiced in the mirror and can make it spurt straight up like a fountain, that way it doesn't stain the carpet. Sebastian turned to his teacher. Equals are you shocked yet? Equals not yet. I guess the audiences like it? Equals yet. They keep asking me to perform at their places, but Mum says I should wait till I leave school. But they make videos and pay me for it $100 each. Equals you mother is okay with that? Equals it was her idea. Equals and you? How do you feel about this? Used. Abused. Victimized. Sebastian laughed aloud. Equals that's what kids who are forced to do these things feel. I love the attention. I love the fact that the fat creeps in the audience wouldn't dare do it, and even if they did they'd look revolting because their bodies are crap. I get a solid kick out of it and feel seriously superior to cretins who have to watch others jerk off to get their thrills. Mr. Achilles was silent, wondering if he was also an inferior cretin, because the thought of watching Sebastian dance was most appealing. Sebastian studied him for several long seconds until his teacher began to feel uncomfortable. Equals do you still like me? Equals yes. Equals I like you too, that's why I've told you things I've never told anyone before. Don't tell anyone. Equals I won't. Equals let's wrestle then. They stripped, tossing their clothes into a corner as if they'd never need them again. Conia's Achilles was slightly shorter than Sebastian with heavily muscled shoulders and arms. His face, however, was an astonishing contrast, deeply tanned and delicately beautiful rather than handsome, large dark eyes and heavy black eyebrows framed by bristle-cut hair that caught the light like flecks of dark gold. A generous mouth and lips that curled up at the corners suggesting a smile, were enhanced by a medium-sized nose with a bump in the middle where he'd broken it as a youth. Designer stubble decorated his jaw. A bikini line was scarcely visible against tan skin. Nestled between massive thighs, his genitals looked deceptively normal. To the rear, a lean strong bum. He stared at Sebastian, wondering if it was such a good idea. The young man seemed wholesome and decent, but just as his smooth slimness hid powerful muscles, so his innocent-seeming eyes concealed a character as calculating and shrewd as any he'd met. He shrugged off his doubts. You've shaved your pubic hair. Now I can't get you by the short and curlies, Achilles' attempt at light-hearted insouciance failed miserably. He was very nervous and stared at Sebastian thoughtfully. If you tell anyone about this I will kill you. Understood, pale gray eyes glinted coldly. Because no one would believe it wasn't my idea and that I wasn't molesting you. I know you're 17 and legal and more experienced than me in many ways, but as your teacher I'd lose everything and probably serve a jail term for corrupting you. Got it? Sebastian didn't doubt the threat was genuine. A chill ran through him. Naked, Mr. Achilles was a totally different person from the genial maths teacher and lycra-clad wrestling instructor. Removal of the wrestling gear that had until then covered his thighs and most of his abdomen revealed a chest covered in tight brown curls that continued in a line down to the thick pubic thatch that ran between his legs and spread over his bum, which was as hairy as his thighs. There was something feral, almost savage, that reminded Sebastian of a large wildcat he and Reginald had once watched tearing apart a struggling bandicoot in the forest. When they'd tried to intervene, the cat had snarled and bared its teeth with such venom they'd retreated in fear. Achilles' smile lacked humor and Sebastian wondered why he'd never noticed how sharp his teeth were. I'll not tell a soul, and don't you tell about me either. Of course not. Achilles tousled Sebastian's hair and the atmosphere returned to normal. The rules remain the same. No punching or kicking or breaking fingers. Everything above the neck is untouchable and so are the balls. Too sensitive and fragile and yours are enormous. Like brown duck eggs. Do ducks lay brown eggs? No idea. Cocks, on the other hand, don't lay eggs, but are reasonably protected between the thighs and usually shrink when you're fighting seriously. If you let your opponent grab it, tough luck. Okay, let's go. Achilles' prediction proved accurate, but Sebastian still felt incredibly vulnerable. Consequently, although his defensive moves improved, attack suffered, and his teacher floored him 5 times in succession. Drenched in sweat they sprawled over their towels on the mats to recover. You're nervous, Achilles observed. Yes. Of me. You're different today. How? You seem dangerous. Wishing you had your gear on. No way. I never want to wear it again. This is real, just as swimming naked is real. He grinned. I just have to trust you're not going to bash my balls, and not worry I'm going to hurt yours. And you, sir? Do you prefer wearing gear? No. By the way, my name's Conias, you can call me Con, and stop being so cautious. Attack me with all you've got. I'm not breakable. Have you done this before? You're the first kid who's brought out the ancient Greek in me. Adult. Too many questions. Back to work and do your worst. Right on, Con. The instant the time clock rang, Sebastian dropped, wrapped his arms round Con's knees and heaved up in an attempt to throw him onto his back. Con twisted in the air, landing on all fours. Sebastian fell onto his opponent's back, thighs squeezing his neck, arms wrapped round his loins. Con grabbed Sebastian's ankles and was about to drag them under and flip them both over when Sebastian grabbed a fistful of pubic hair and heaved sideways with all his strength. Con grunted in surprise and was forced to change position enough for Sebastian to finish the move and claim his first point. Equals that does it, tonight I'm shaving them off. Can't have you doing that again. Sebastian threw himself into the next 3 bouts like a madman, and managed a win, a draw and an honorable loss. Lying side by side they relaxed, breathing raggedly and counting their bruises, as it had been a particularly rough afternoon. Sebastian could feel his muscles complaining and his bum tingled. Where Con had pulled his cheeks apart to prevent being floored ignominiously. Con turned to Sebastian with a grin. That's the sort of fighting I like. Rough, tough, and rude. They splashed each other with water from the wash basin to rinse off the sweat, dressed, shook hands and parted, both uncommonly pleased with their exercise. Sebastian arrived home feeling oddly excited. Next time he smiled to himself at the thought and wondered if Conia's Achilles was also planning their next bout. Chapter 4. Thursday arrived hot and still, a good omen for Sebastian who ran best in the heat. He was looking forward to winning both the 200 and 100-meter sprints. Not that there was any serious competition with only 20 senior students in the entire school. Pleasurable anticipation was spoiled, however, when at breakfast his mother chirped, I've decided to come and cheer you on at the athletic sports this afternoon. Her son looked up in alarm. It isn't necessary for you to come, Mum, it's just a school sports meeting, no big deal, and he was furious. How dare his mother go to the sports day? She'd never gone to his high school before for anything, not even to enroll him. Why now? He had to find a way to stop her. That's sweet of you, dear, but I've recently realized I've been a poor mother as far as your schooling goes. I've never even been to a parent meeting in the 4.5 years you've been there. It's time for me to be less selfish. I was speaking to Mrs. Blackthorne, you know, Reginald's mother. Of course he did. Reginald was his best, indeed his only friend. The tall, big-boned, sandy-haired, hazel-eyed eco-freak whose karate chop could floor an ox. A gentle giant who didn't fit the macho mold, preferring to use a sharp tongue to ward off aggression. Of course there was always one dork who misread the signs. Like the previous Friday when a hefty kid had flapped a limp wrist and yelled across the quadrangle, "Hey Reg, rumor has it you're queer, are you?" Why, Reginald had asked innocently, irritated at being called Reg. Do you fancy me? Everyone laughed, making the idiot feel foolish enough to prove his manhood. Arms flailing he charged at Reginald yelling, "Fucking pansy." Without any apparent effort, Reginald deflected a punch, leg tripped the guy and cuffed him across the back of the head as he went down. It looked like the sort of harmless slap a mildly irritated parent might give a child, but the side of the hand was hard and traveling at speed. The would-be hero staggered, fell, sat up, looked stupid, then burst into tears, unseen by Reginald, who was walking away chatting to Sebastian as if he'd forgotten the incident already. Reginald's greatest claim to fame among his sexually guilt-ridden peers was his encyclopedic knowledge about sex. Many a young man now slept easily because of Reginald's confident assertion that masturbation is essential to masculine health and sanity because the increased flow of blood during erections keeps the penis healthy, and frequent orgasms make a man contented. Therefore it should be practiced as often as possible. Sebastian admired his friend's relaxed, self-confident bravery and wished he could be as easy about himself, but he didn't dare. His apparent confidence was built on very shaky foundations. Anyway, Desol continued, Equals Reginald told his mother that you're the best runner in the school. And would certainly win the 100 yards. Equals meters. Equals meters what, dear? It's the 100 meters, not yards. It's over 40 years since we went metric, Mum, anyway. I'm not a certainty to win and I'll feel stupid if you're watching when I lose. Equals don't be silly, I'd still be proud of you if you came last. Wave when you see me and make sure I don't miss your race. Sebastian ground his teeth in impotent fury. In his first week at high school, other kids had seen him in the town with his mother and asked who she was. He'd told them she was his grandmother, who liked to pretend she was his mother. The other day he'd overheard a couple of classmates laughing about his crazy old skinny grandma. 11 years of embarrassment was enough. Could a child divorce his mother for being embarrassingly old and not telling him who his father was? He couldn't even go north and live with the uncle he'd never met because he was gaga in a nursing home. Perhaps he could put his mother in a home. 70 was as good as dead and she was always sickening for something because she wouldn't eat. Angrily he shouldered his knapsack and jogged to school. Rodney was looking forward to the school's sports day at his old school, hoping to see the cute guy in the tiny pouch who looked at least 20, but had confessed to 17. Sebastian. That was his name. Perhaps they'd, no, probably not. A quick kiss under the water didn't mean anything. Lots of young guys would do it for a laugh. He hadn't admitted he was gay, but he was easy company. Rodney was 23, not that big a difference in ages. Lots of young guys preferred older men. Then he remembered he wasn't into relationships. He also wasn't into deep thinking, so tossed the thoughts to the back of his handsome head and faced the mirrors. He was in good shape for seduction. If not Sebastian, then some other not quite so young male would find him desirable. He gazed at his reflection. Lean and mean. No. Lean and not mean. A recent checkup declared him to be in excellent health, although absence of body fat had the doctor suggesting he put on a few extra kilos. Rodney disagreed. His body may have cost him uncountable hours of exercise, a dull diet and sufficient sleep, but muscles as clearly defined as an anatomical drawing, a handsome face and natural grace of movement were a lucrative meal ticket. He had no intention of risking. He turned slowly between the 4 full-length mirrors arranged so he could see himself from every angle. Dragging long, sensitive fingers over his loins triggered twinges of arousal and he smiled in anticipation. Usually he would devote at least an hour to his love-making, but this morning he was in a hurry. Mt. Hermes Grammar, Sebastian and the world were waiting for him that afternoon. He hadn't been back to the old school in 7 years. Would his old maths teacher still be there? More to the point, would he see Jason Boylov, jerk-off Jason who'd railroaded him out of school? He put on a CD with a strong sexy beat, let his body movements synchronize with the solid pulse. Caressed his small but perfectly formed nipples and attained full arousal. With practiced grace he lowered himself to the carpet, planning poses and moves for that night's performance at a widow woman's 50th birthday. The booking had been made by her son, who had been prepared to pay for total nudity, erotic play, and orgasm. If Rodney could entice the fellow's mother to participate in the shenanigans, then there was an extra $50. If he fucked her in front of the other guests, there was another 100. Not for the first time he wondered at the bizarre love-hate relationship so many young men have with their mothers. He had learned to ignore such requests and play it by ear, putting on a show that everyone, especially the mother, would enjoy. Picturing the coming evening's performance and Sebastian at the pool, increased the pleasure of orgasm and he groaned in relief, relaxing for a minute before showering off sweat, cum, and carpet fluff. Making love to his reflections was a daily reward for maintaining his strict dietary and exercise regimen. Unashamedly, he admitted to anyone who asked that he preferred solo sex. Because another body not only got in the way, but was never up to the high physical standards he demanded of himself. Imperfection was a turn-off. Your body is your instrument, he lectured all who would listen, and a well-tuned instrument is essential to a successful life. But what did one wear to a high school athletics afternoon? Desole checked her thinning hair, patiently rearranging strands to cover the head evenly. The rinse had turned out more pink than beige, and instead of distracting, had drawn attention to the mauve blotches on the scalp. She should have dyed her skin the same color as he hair. Ah well, a hat would cover it. She plonked on the wide-brimmed straw with daisies clambering around the brim that she'd bought for her sister's wedding. Was it really 40 years ago? She sighed in resignation at wrinkles that a thick paste of foundation had failed to fill, and stepped back to view the overall impression. An impertinent shaft of sunlight set her wondering if showing a cleavage wasn't such a good idea. It wasn't clear which of the vertical folds was the cleavage. A swathe of pink chiffon draped over the offending flesh was rather fetching, she thought, not stopping to wonder what it would fetch. A lifetime of bulimic bouts ensured her figure still looked youthful, as long as it was fully clothed and seen from a distance. Her friends had always admired her courage in choosing clothes, and she thought the apricot skirt and green blouse would cement her reputation. Fortunately, she could still manage 6-inch heels, if the ground was firm and flat. She smiled and wished she hadn't. A less subtle reminder to keep her lips together was difficult to imagine. It was too late to get false teeth, her dentist had insisted, they'd never stay in place. So she was stuck with the yellowing, chipped originals. The high school grandstand had been built when the student population was 700, so even with about 50 parents occupying the front rows, there was plenty of space for the students to spread out and make a picnic of the afternoon. The seniors were expected to run the event with minimum interference from teachers. Mr. Sprague, as sports master, was in overall charge and, assisted by Charles, wandered around astonishing everyone with his pleasant chatter while ensuring everything went well. Sebastian, Reginald, and Zoltan were the judges. For the field events they traipsed around from high jump to long jump, from shot put to discus, and then it was time for the running races. For these they stood on temporary steps at the finishing line in front of the V.I.P seats. Sebastian chose to judge third place because he would be standing on the bottom step where he had an unobstructed view of the crowds on the stands, and their view of him was equally unhindered. Reginald, in skin-tight licras, stood above and behind, while Zoltan took the top step. Charles and Sprague came to stand beside them for a while, and Sebastian nudged Reginald when he saw them touch fingers. Reginald said he wasn't jealous, he had someone else lined up as a future lover. Sebastian. The high-pitched shriek caused the starter to fire his pistol too early, and chaos ensued as the boys began running and had to be called back. There was nowhere to hide. Sebastian was trapped at the finishing line in full view of everyone. He gave a short wave and watched as his mother pushed her way to the front and squeezed with the maximum of fuss into a space beside the principal. Irritation is too insignificant a word to describe Mr. Noel's reaction to Desole's intrusion. However, exasperated indignation turned to pity when he learned that the ancient crone was his favorite pupil's mother. Poor Sebastian! How on earth had such a harridan given birth to an intelligent and perfect young gentleman? Instead of shaking hands and sitting quietly, Desole grasped the principal's arm and asked if he recognized her. I'm sorry, madam, but I don't recall the pleasure. He prized off her claws and restrained the urge to wipe his hand. I was your secretary for the first month of your appointment as principal, 17 years ago. She smiled winningly, forgetting to keep her lips closed. Mr. Noel blanched visibly and shrank back in alarm. He remembered now, and dredged up a smile. Equals yes, of course. Destructiva, isn't it? The shriek of laughter nearly unmanned him and caused far too many heads to turn. Equals oh you wicked man. It's Desol. Equals ah yes, he muttered. Equals Desol, what a desolate month that had been for everyone, he thought. If she hadn't left, the entire staff would have gone on strike. She was the reason not one woman since then had gained employment at MT Hermes Grammar in any capacity, temporary or permanent. Equals I was so sorry to leave you in the lurch after only a month, she chattered, equals but I was pregnant with Sebastian. Equals we managed to cope, was the best Mr. Noel could manage. Equals look, the seniors are lining up for the start of their sprints. There's Sebastian. There were no side seams in Sebastian's running shorts. There was precious little material either. Two little flaps of flimsy pale blue nylon, one at the front and one at the back, were joined between the legs. This permitted maximum leg extension while covering the minimum of flesh. Everyone agreed he had a beautiful navel. When standing still the view was tantalizing. His legs seemed to go all the way up to his armpits. Private, or in Sebastian's case not so private, parts were bunched in his new yellow pouch, making an attractive bulge at the front, and a centimeter of firm brown cheek escaped below the hem at the rear. When running, the wind lifted the diaphanous material, revealing a pair of perfectly formed gluteus maxima. As the running track was grass and Sebastian ran in bare feet, his minimalist garb made the other runners in their lycra or traditional cotto and shorts, singlets, and running shoes appear somewhat overdressed. Charming modesty combined with the fact that he was obviously completely unaware of how breathtakingly sexy he looked, meant that no one raised the slightest objection. Naturally, he won both his races. With heavy steps he crossed to his mother. Equals well done, Sebastian, Mr. Noel said with a smile. Equals oh I'm so proud, squawked Desol, sounding as well as looking like a demented parrot. Mr. Noel turned to Desol. Equals it's been a pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Sanspierre. He stood up to go, then relented, turned back to her and added vaguely. Equals perhaps you would like to join the staff and parents for afternoon tea. Desol simpered her acceptance and Sebastian raced away to catch Rodney, who he'd seen talking to Mr. Boilov, the technical drawing teacher. As he approached it looked as if they were arguing. Curious, he sauntered over. Equals hi, Rodney. Rodney turned and his angry scowl transformed into a knee-melting smile. Equals hi. Saw your races, nearly as brilliant as your shorts. Where'd you get them? Show me round. The school. He draped an arm across Sebastian's shoulders and they sauntered off, leaving Mr. Boilov to simmer. Sebastian turned back and was shocked at the fury on the teacher's face. To his chagrin, Desol trailed Mr. Noel up to the staff room for afternoon tea where, desperate to offload his unwelcome guest, he hailed the economic studies teacher. Equals Peter Vile, meet Desol Sanspierre. Mr. Vile, a swarthy, balding, overweight fellow in a tracksuit, kept his hands in his pockets and looked blank. Equals Desol was the principal's secretary when I first arrived, Peteru. You were here then? Equals don't remember, the fellow replied insolently, turning away to grab a cream cake as he exited the room. Mr. Noel shrugged. Equals young teachers today can be as rude as their pupils. Equals he's not young. I remember him clearly, Desol said with quiet venom. Equals he is 38 and in poor physical condition. He arrived on my 54th birthday. A young graduate of 22, full of himself and arrogant to boot. Equals yes. Well, as they say, no one really changes. I'll have to excuse myself I'm afraid, Mrs. Sans pair, but I'm required to circulate. Perhaps we'll meet again. Finding no one prepared to talk to her, Desole tottered back to her car, wondering why she'd come and wishing she hadn't worn such high heels. Her bunions were killing her. Sebastian and Rodney found a quiet spot under a tree and lay on the grass in the shade. How come you know creepy Jason? Sebastian asked. Who? Mr. Boylov. The way he looks at me sometimes gives me the willies. You looked furious as if you were going to hit him. He wasn't always like that. When I was here 7 years ago he directed the school play. I was desperate to be in it. After my auditions he said I was too short and looked too young, but he'd give me lessons and then perhaps find me a small part. The lessons were at his place and he reckoned I'd learn to move more naturally if I took off my clothes. I didn't object, I was too keen to get on stage. Then he said an actor had to be prepared to take parts he disliked as well as parts he liked. I said I understood that. When teaching me to stand and walk properly he pushed and stroked me on my bum and thighs. Which I didn't like, but in a funny way it made me proud to have an adult paying me so much attention. I got an erection and tried to hide it, but he told me to be proud of it, it proved I was a man. Then he said there was a kissing scene in the play, so he'd act the girl. I refused to kiss him because his breath smelled like rotten horse shit. He got angry, dropped his tweeds and forced me to suck his cock. Everything went cold. I couldn't think. I've never been so scared in my life. His face turned pale at the memory. I still can't talk about it? Sorry. Sebastian didn't know what to say. He was horrified. Did you get the part? I had 3 more lessons and had to do it each time, but then he said I wasn't good enough. When I protested he threatened that if I told anyone what he'd done he'd deny it and tell everyone I was a crazy queer who'd made it up because I hadn't got a part in the play. A shocked silence. I was a mess. I refused to go to school. My parents are Jehovah's Witness, so I couldn't tell them or they'd have locked me away, then shamed and blamed me in front of the whole congregation and had them pray for my damned soul. So I ran away to Brisbane for 4 years. When I finally got the courage to return, they'd gone to a mission in East Africa, thank goodness. I never want to see them again. Rodney sat silently as Sebastian digested this. And today you confronted him? I told him what a vile pig he was. He started to argue. Said he thought I'd enjoyed it and it was me who'd come onto him. I'm such a wimp. I wanted to strangle him, but thank goodness you came along. Sebastian took Rodney's hand and stroked it, unable to find words of comfort. Speak of the devil. He's over there with Mr. Trovert. What the hell's Trovert doing with such a bastard? Let's follow. He dragged Rodney to his feet. I liked Mr. Trovert. He let me hide in the library during sport, Rodney said listlessly. I can't believe they'd be friends. I think they're going to the swimming pool. Come on. The pool gate slammed shut as they crept to the rear of the enclosure, out of sight of anyone passing. The clink of bottles and voices made them curious enough to climb onto the roof of the pump room, which served as part of the wall. Peering over they saw Boylov and Trovert sitting with their backs to the wall directly below. What a fucking circus, Jason Boylov complained. Yes. You said you wanted to talk to me. Mr. Trovert's voice was impatient. What about? Just had a run-in with an ex-pupil. Reckons I sexually abused him 7 years ago and forced him to leave school without any qualifications. Did you? No. Well, perhaps, but not intentionally. It was all a misunderstanding. He wanted to be in the school play, but was a bit of a short arse. Good-looking kid though. I offered to give him tuition and if there was a part for a runt he could have it. He came to my place after school. Randy little bastard, the most beautiful kid I've ever seen, and sexy with it. And what a flirt. I got a hard on whenever he fluttered his eyelashes at me. Wondering what he'd do, I said he should try acting. Naked. Yes, I know, I'm a fuckwit, but I stupidly thought that's what he wanted. He certainly didn't object, dropped his tweeds and pranced around like a priapic young satyr. Had a bloody big cock. Mr. Boylov took a swig of beer, burped, then continued. I used the excuse of teaching him how to move to feel him up. He didn't seem to mind. Kept his hard on. He was 16 and I imagined he knew what he was doing. I tried to kiss him. He said my breath stank. It does. You're a smoker. You all smell like incinerators. I can't understand, though, why you thought he knew what he was doing. I sure as hell didn't when I was 16. You were the teacher supposed to take care of him, not seduce him. Yet. I was a total idiot. I've no idea what got into me. I've never done it before or since. I'm not a pedophile. I'm not interested in boys. But some young men are irresistible. I guess. Testosterone was raging. Then I told him to suck my cock. He didn't want to, I could see that, but I was too far gone to stop. He came twice more for lessons and the same thing happened, but then I got frightened. If anyone found out what I was doing to a pupil, I'd be in prison getting raped. So I told him there wasn't a part after all. He raced away crying foul and I never saw him again. It's the truth. He just took off and I felt rotten and terrified for 7 years. Terrified. Of what? You see in the papers guys in their 40s and 50s suing teachers who fiddled with them. 30 years before. For 7 years I've broken out in a sweat every time I think about it, imagining I'm going to get a court summons. I tell you, it's ruined my life and it's all my fault. I tricked the poor kid and abused his trust. Did you tell him that? No. I was going to, but then thought if I admitted I'd done it he'd sue me. I'm a fucking wimp. There was nothing to say, so nothing was said for several minutes. I've also had an unwelcome blast from the past today, Rex Trovert said quietly. Did you see that old crone who sat beside the boss? She was his secretary when I first arrived. Hoity-toity bitch. It was my first teaching post, so I tried to make a good impression by offering to drive her home. After the first of Noel's long staff meetings. It was raining and she didn't have her car. She invited me in for a thank you drink, then demanded I screw her. Rather you than me. She looks 100 now, so she must have been ancient then. 54, she told me. Tell me you're joking. I kid you not. When I refused, she threatened to have me fired. Said she'd accuse me of attempted rape and I'd never get another job. I was too innocent to know any different. A bloody dangerous situation. Any man who goes anywhere alone with a woman he doesn't know well, is asking for a lawsuit. They're always believed. So what did you do? I shut my eyes and thought of a Bavarian gatto. But once wasn't enough. The following week, she demanded another. I was on the point of quitting when she disappeared. Suddenly she was gone. I was free and never saw her again until today. She's got her reward, though. She was a plain Jane then, now she's a really, really ugly old carcass. Luckily, I recognized her and stayed well away. Just looking at her made me feel dirty. Let's go for a swim. No togs. The place is surrounded by 2-meter-high concrete walls, the gates locked, and Sebastian Sanspar has been swimming naked all week at lunch times with the boss's approval. Did you see his running gear today? Bet that turned you on. Had a hard on all afternoon watching him. That body. In the pool he's as lithe as a seal, on the track he's a god. Equals you come at lunch times to watch. Equals of course. Equals he's certainly a great kid. Equals I'd like to lick him all over. Equals kinky. Equals bet you do it to your lovely wife. Equals fee is not a student and not a male. Come on. Get your gear off. They stripped. Jason Boyilov boasted a sickly paunch, unhealthy sagging skin, limp buttocks and a tiny penis. Rodney thought he'd never seen anything more revolting. Rex Trovert was in better shape, but if he didn't take care budding love handles would spoil the effect of smooth, naturally dark skin, narrow hips and wide shoulders. Equals geez, your balls are as big as Sebastian's, Boyilov laughed. Equals have you seen them? Tennis balls. I'll bet he fills a cup every time he comes. Equals you're incorrigible. Find yourself a lover and forget the students. Rex slapped Jason on his bum, leaving a red handprint, and dived cleanly into the water. Sebastian's face was white from shock. Equals that means, he muttered. Equals wait here, Rodney whispered, lowering himself down the side wall of the filter room into the enclosure, out of sight of the swimmers. He slithered round to the front, grabbed their clothes, tossed them over the wall, and clambered back himself, joining Sebastian who'd already scrambled down. Gathering everything up they raced back to the main building, dumped their plunder behind the door of the principal's study, then retreated to the almost deserted car park and Rodney's Mercedes Sports. Equals can I come with you? Sebastian couldn't face going home to his mother. He had to think seriously about what he'd just heard. Equals where are your bike and clothes? Equals the bike's locked and safe enough. This is all I wore today. Equals you cycled to school and spent the day wearing nothing but those two flimsy flaps of cloth with your bum practically hanging out. Sebastian looked confused. Equals yes? Why not? Equals what are you wearing under it? Sebastian pulled his shorts down to expose his yellow pouch. Equals very nice. Aren't you worried about getting raped? Equals I ride too fast. Get some good wolf whistles though. Equals I'll bet. Okay, get in. At that moment, Reginald ran up. Equals Rodney. What are you doing here? Equals visiting my old school. Reginald stared at Sebastian in dismay. Equals are you too? Equals no, Reginald, we aren't. Rodney gave a sudden laugh. Equals don't tell me. Sebastian is the guy you're up to the eyeballs in love with. Reginald blushed furiously. Sebastian seemed not to have heard. He just stood staring into space, face creased into a frown. Equals well, you've good taste and we'd love to stay and chat, but we're going back to my place. Equals can I come with you? Reginald looked so sad Rodney let him fold himself into the space behind the two bucket seats. Like an automaton, Sebastian lowered himself into the passenger seat and 10 minutes later they pulled into the basement garage of a modern block of flats. Upstairs, Sebastian sat in silence in an armchair while Rodney took Reginald into the kitchen and told him what they'd just done while making coffee. Their voices and laughter passed over Sebastian as he pondered the revelation that Rex Trovert was his father. It explained his olive skin, almost black hair and brown eyes, but what else did it mean? He felt happy and nervous and sick. At least his father liked him. And he'd always enjoyed his father's classes. And he ran the library brilliantly. The other two returned with coffee, and drank and chattered. Sebastian stared across the city to the sea and wondered what to do. Chapter 5. Back at the school swimming pool, Jason Boyilov and Rex Trovert were impatiently waiting for dusk to fall. When the last sounds of activity had died they ventured forth and, keeping to the Fay-NCE line, made their way to the principal's house, an old Queenslander on high stumps, accessed Through a gate near the tennis courts. Equals Jason and Rex, isn't it? Welcomed Mrs. Noel, apparently unconcerned at her visitor's lack of clothing. Equals come in. Adam's on the phone, he'll join you directly. She led them into a comfortable lounge, placed small towels on the seats of two sprawling armchairs and went off to make a cup of tea. Equals I guess these are for us, Rex said, plonking himself down on one of the towels and leaning back with a grin. Equals it would seem the Noels are not unfamiliar with naked visitors. Equals he's a nudist at weekends, belongs to some club, Jason said thoughtfully, sitting forward to conceal his potbelly and genitals. Equals even so, her equanimity at the arrival of two stark naked men is more than a tad surprising. It wasn't so surprising. The high-set house gave a view over the entire school grounds, and the principal and his wife had watched with delight as the two teachers crept nervously towards their house. Earlier in the afternoon, ensconced in her favorite chair on the veranda, Mrs. Noel had observed the comings and goings of the sports day. She disliked crowds, so hadn't joined the parents on the grandstand, preferring to spy. Thus she had also seen Rex and Jason disappear into the swimming pool enclosure, and a few minutes later, Sebastian and Rodney wander up and disappear behind the wall, followed by the clothes thrown over and the two lads scampering off. Very little escaped Mrs. Noel's argus-eyed vigilance. Since the day her husband became their principal, everyone, teachers and pupils alike, had wondered how he knew so much about them. How he managed to pounce at exactly the right time on smokers, on teachers avoiding their playground duty or arriving late and sneaking into school, or getting pupils to clean their cars, or borrowing school equipment for the weekend. Some had attributed supernatural powers to the man, who remained always friendly, especially when pointing out their peccadillos. They soon discovered, though, that a reprimand delivered with a smile is no less impressive than a negative rant. Knowing his boss, Rex was not worried about explaining the situation. They'd always been on the best of terms, and from Mrs. Noel's welcome he guessed there would be no problems. "You're looking irritatingly relaxed," Jason snapped. Equals what do you mean? Equals sprawling there with your cods in full view. Rex looked down. Equals they're rather fine, Sophie tells me. Why would I hide them? Equals you're as bad as Sebastian. Equals if you've got them, flaunt them, Rex said smugly. He was proud of his genitals. Large without being ridiculous. Smooth and manly. Equals so, the boss is a naturist, that explains why he supports nude swimming. Equals I'm surprised you haven't joined them at lunch times. Equals I intend to from tomorrow. Just wanted to clear it with Adam. At that moment, Mrs. Noel arrived carrying a teapot, followed by her husband with a tray of cups and biscuits that he put on a side table. Turning to the teachers he said thoughtfully, equals someone stole your gear and you've no idea who it was. Equals not the foggiest. Equals at least your clothes are no problem, the cleaner just called to say he found a pile of clothes behind my study door. He's bringing them over. Equals so it appears they weren't trying to really hurt you, Mrs. Noel said brightly. Equals just to let you know something. Equals yes, but what? Equals I'm sure if you think hard enough you'll discover the answer to that, she said with an enigmatic smile. Equals by the way, Rex added casually. Equals is it okay if I also swim au naturel at lunch times? Equals of course, if you think your reputation can stand it. Equals what do you mean? Equals nothing at all dear boy. Nothing at all, said Mr. Noel, thus encouraging his teacher to think carefully before leaping into cold water. Equals whoever took our clothes had been listening to us, Rex said thoughtfully as they returned to their cars. Equals and the person that springs to mind is your put upon ex-pupil. Equals makes sense. That's worrying. Equals not at all. If he held a real grudge we wouldn't have seen our clothes or wallets again. I hope you're right. Rodney pulled up in front of Sebastian's house and stared at a blank, pink stuccoed facade that stared right back. Just left of center, 3 steps led up to a featureless door with no apparent means of ingress. On the right, a short drive descended steeply to the closed door of a basement garage. Very intimidating, he said in some awe. Your folks must be rolling in it. Hardly, Sebastian replied in some confusion. Mum's just a secretary. Your father then. Haven't got one, Sebastian replied curtly. It's just a house. Worth several $1 million, Rodney snapped, irritated at Sebastian's attitude. Sorry, I didn't mean to sound like that. It's just that my life is getting complicated. Forgive me. I never refuse requests from desirable young men, Rodney grinned. Now, where's your place? Reggie. Sebastian leaned through the window. Reggie, would you, can you stay with me? Tonight. But. Please. Like Rodney, I'm the slave of your charms, Reginald clambered out, unable to believe his luck. They waved goodbye to Rodney and mounted the steps. Sebastian placed his palm on an unobtrusive panel to the side of the door. It opened silently and they entered. Very high-tech, Reginald observed admiringly. I've been trying to get Dad to upgrade security. But he reckons we've nothing worth stealing. The entrance foyer was a hexagonal space with doors in the center of each wall. A tiny chandelier, ornate coat stand, and a hexagonal oriental carpet were the sole furnishings. Reginald gazed around in amusement. 6 identical doors. Which one do we take? Sebastian pointed to each door in turn. We've just come through this one, that one on the left goes to the guest washroom and toilet, the one on the right is the internal entrance to the garage below. That one in the middle leads to the lounge and kitchen, etc. That one between the garage and lounge goes to Mum's quarters, they're the mirror image of mine, and this one's mine. Come on. He led a bemused Reginald into a large, empty dressing room and closed the door. We take off our clothes here, Sebastian whispered, removing his shorts and pouch. I never wear clothes at home, and neither do the guests we take in from time to time, they even arrive. Starkers. You're the first friend I've ever brought home, so Mum will expect you to be like me, I guess. She's begun to frighten me a bit lately. I'm too nervous to think, but it's probably best if you don't wear clothes. The strain in Sebastian's voice was obvious, so Reginald asked no questions, stuffed his jeans, underpants and shirt in a shelf and put his sandals on the floor beside the only other things in the room, Sebastian's leather thong sandals. Where are all your clothes? When we first moved here, this room was used to store everything, so I kept the few clothes I had on a shelf in Mum's dressing room. I never wear anything other than shorts, and when I put a pair out to be washed she puts another in here. It's not worth arguing with her about it, I'd never win. My running shorts and new yellow pouch, though, I keep in the cupboard beside my bed. Still seems odd. She told me that Mr. Fartbook was worried the guys who stayed here would take my clothes and run away, whereas if they had no clothes they'd have to stay. Reginald shook his head in disbelief. Yes, I know. It sounds criminal, but somehow Mum made it seem perfectly reasonable. Odd. Isn't it, how we don't question things when adults tell us it's normal? It never occurred to me that we might be holding guys against their will, that they had the right to leave if they wanted to. Because we were the good guys and they needed taking care of. That's the power of brainwashing. I don't even have towels because she says they go smelly in the humidity. A few press ups and I'm dry in a minute. I don't like clothes, so don't feel deprived, but I do have a beautiful bathroom. They walked through into a luxurious bathroom with shower, sunken tub, toilet, and vanity unit. Sebastian tossed his running shorts and G-string into a laundry basket and they stood side by side gazing at their reflections in the large, full-length mirror. This was the stuff of Reginald's wildest fantasies, but in them he'd forgotten that he looked long and lanky, despite his physical strength and honed karate skills, while Sebastian was physical perfection. What are you thinking? Sebastian asked. That you're beautiful and I'm ugly. Sebastian looked at his friend in surprise. No. No. It's the opposite, Reggie. Beauty is a reflection of character. I'm a false front, an emotional mess, while you're an island of sanity in a sea of hysteria, therefore to me you are beautiful. I'd love to be as tall as you, as calm and rational as you, as easy and uncaring of the opinions of others as you. I wish I could fight like you and had a sharp tongue like you. I wish I was you. Bollocks. Mum says I'm just a long streak of pelican shit. She's mad. You've already started filling out and soon you're going to have a much better body than me, and your strong jaw and noble brow mean your good looks will last your whole life. I'll be just another boring body in the crowd in 10 years. Strong jaw and noble brow. Really Seb, this isn't a fairy tale. It is for me now you're here. You don't mind that I'm lanky and pale. You're not lanky, you're tall and fit. Your body looks as if it's carved from the most expensive ivory, you can walk all day, you're a karate kid, the only really interesting person I know, and you respect nature. If I'm so perfect, why don't you love me? You know I'd do anything for you. I'd die for you. Now who's into fairytale sloppy sentiment? You're my best and only friend and I do love you. But not sexually. Sebastian looked up into Reginald's trusting eyes and felt a twinge of guilt. Reggie, I'm not good enough for you. My life is very odd and strange. I've had sex of one sort or another with about 15 guys and felt nothing. I'm terrified that if we take our friendship to the sexual level it will spoil things. You'll be disappointed and realize I'm an empty shell. What sort of sex? Bumfucking. No, not that. At least no one's done it to me, but I've done it to others. Was it good? Not really. I prefer just kissing and stroking, touching, and playing with each other and finally jerking off, but often I don't care if I don't come. That sounds exactly what I dream about doing with you. Sebastian's smile was unsure. Well, if you stay the night who knows what might happen. I'm staying. Shower first. They showered together, soaping each other timidly as if frightened the dream would shatter. Neither became aroused, it was too special an experience for that. They scraped off the water with their hands and jumped up and down to dislodge the last droplets. After a score of press ups they went through to Sebastian's bedroom where Reginald laughed at the bed, admired the space and said he'd have to call his parents. Reception's bad inside too much concrete. Grab my mobile. They went out through the French windows to the rear patio and made the call, then wandered back through the lounge to the bedroom. Like Rodney said, your mother must be rolling in it to own this place. Everything's so huge and modern and expensive. The patio and garden are enormous and totally private, this is one of the most sought-after residential areas in the city, and your bedroom's like something in a period movie. That king-size 4-poster. Is it comfortable? Try it. Reginald lay on the bed and grinned. Very comfortable. Is this where your guests stay? With you. In this bed? Yes, and one's coming tomorrow for a week. I'm jealous. Don't be. It means nothing. I just help them to regain confidence in life after being beaten up. An hospital at least. A friend in need sort of thing. Come outside again. Sebastian led Reginald to the far end of the garden, discussing plants and flowers as they went. They stood in silence for a few minutes until Reginald could bear it no longer. Why did you want me to come today, and stay the night? I don't know. I feel something's wrong. I'm nervous. Don't face the house or talk loudly. I'm probably paranoid, but I think I'm being watched, spied on. Mum sometimes knows things, I'm sure. I haven't told her, and Jack too sometimes comes up with things that he can't know. Who's Jack? Mum's accountant and confidant. He taught me how to treat the guests, after rescuing me from drowning. Have you had sex with him? No, just a cuddle. He's not gay, I don't think. Actually, I know nothing about him. I know nothing much about anyone in my life. Mum has always insisted she has no idea who my father is. Because she was raped by a masked man. I've no idea where she came from. Her parents were dead before I was born. Her boss, Fartbook, is fat, ugly and very strange. All I know is he's insanely rich, rescues homeless young men from the streets, owns a private hospital where he puts them back together again physically, then trusts me to give them a psychological boost and physical male bonding crap until he finds work for them. I get friendly with the guys, but not one has ever contacted me again afterwards. Sebastian paused, sighed, and shook himself as if trying to dislodge something unpleasant from between his shoulder blades, before continuing in a voice even softer than before. Fartbook seems to have some sort of hold over my mother. She manages his employment agency. Once or twice a month we have a soiree here for Fartbook's business acquaintances. Mostly from China, India, or the Philippines. I've no idea what they talk about or why they come. Although sometimes I perform for them. Perform. I've always made up dances and routines since I was old enough to walk, crappy stuff. But they seem to like it. Naked. Of course. To Reginald there was no of course about it, but Sebastian's innocence precluded any comment. And I'm the first friend you've ever brought home. Yes. Mum's never said I can't, but I know she didn't want me to. It didn't matter until now. You see, you're the first person I've wanted to bring home. It took what happened this afternoon to make me realize I need the support of someone I can trust. What happened? Rodney told you about us eavesdropping on Boylov and Trovert. Yes. What he didn't tell you was that Rex Trovert confessed to Boylov that my mother forced him to have sex with her a bit less than 17 years ago when she was the temporary school secretary. The dates are exact. He's my father. And now I know, I can see all sorts of similarities. His skin color to name only one. My father was raped, not Mum. I don't know if I can act normally with her anymore. That's one reason I wanted you here, so if I seem strange she'll think it's because I've a visitor. Reginald took Sebastian's hand and stroked it. Why did Trovert talk about it today, do you reckon? Seems a bit odd, especially with Boylov. I guess it was because Boylov was so upset and confessed what he'd done to Rodney, so the shock of seeing my mother at the sports brought back unpleasant memories and a secret he also wanted to get off his chest. He knew Boylov wouldn't tell anyone. My mother likes yours. No accounting for taste. Anyway, she doesn't really know her. She's never been here, they only meet at that ridiculous born-again religious happy crappy place. At least Mr. Trovert is a really excellent guy. I always wondered where you got your looks and character. Meaning my mother was an unlikely source. No offense, but yes. I always assumed you'd been adopted by your grandmother. Are you going to tell Mr. Trovert he's your father? Equals he won't want to know he's got a nutcase for a son. He's married now, probably with kids of his own. The sound of a car pulling into the basement garage silenced them. Sebastian took Reginald to the rear wall of the house where a small shed concealed the swimming pool pump and the downpipes from the roof that passed through a wide opening to the garage beneath, before disappearing into the city's storm water drains. It was dim inside, and as long as they didn't move they were invisible from below. They peered down and watched Desole get out of her Audi, take a bag from the back seat, lock the car and walk towards the stairs. Reginald felt inexplicably nervous. In the event, Desole was distracted, seemed coolly uninterested in Reginald staying the night, and ignored him. She microwaved 3 frozen dinners, reminded Sebastian to be home early to meet the new guest the following day, then took her tray to her room and shut the door. Left to their own devices, shyness overtook them. They lay on the bed and talked about nothing in particular. How come you know Rodney? Sebastian asked. Dad's his manager. Manager. Yeah. He manages loads of show business people. Singers, dancers, actors. Finds gigs, makes appointments, organizes concerts. Mostly for the tourist trade. Rodney's so popular for private parties Dad has to turn people away. He also runs a couple of nightclubs. Rodney. No, Dad. What nightclubs? Phallus Palace and Hole in One. They're gay night spots. Dad used to have a heterosexual one too, but gave it up because there was always trouble, drunken fights, violence, drugs. The gay ones are usually well behaved and polite to performers unless they're invaded by straights. But, what does Rodney do? He's the most popular creative dancer in the city, Reginald said with a grin. Creative. Meaning very sexy stripper who'll do anything in front of an audience. And I mean anything. And you've seen him? Is he good? He's brilliant. If I'm there I act as his assistant. When he tosses his gear off I collect it without being obvious so he can exit gracefully. At the clubs. Sometimes, also at afternoon hen parties, bridal showers, that sort of thing if it's on the weekend. I also help Dad at the clubs. He reckons it might change my mind about being gay if I see what they get up to. Does he care if you're gay? Not at all, I think. We've never really talked about it. He's not the sort of person you can talk to seriously. Doesn't listen. And has it put you off? What do they get up to? Of course it hasn't, I was born queer. But it's taught me not to be focused only on sex. They're private clubs, members only, so the only rule seems to be no coming on the dance floor because the insurance doesn't cover falls on slippery semen. Sebastian's face was a picture of disbelief. You're joking. Yeah, they're usually a pretty conservative lot. Some of the young guys are hot, great sweaty torsos and of course the occasional G-string worn by someone who should have known better. We had a Mr. Nude Phallus Palace competition last month. You'd have won it hands down. But most patrons are as boring as everyone else you meet on the street and not particularly friendly. Downright rude most of them. I've seen no evidence of a gay culture, support network, or any other sign that they're less egocentric and selfish than the rest of the population. Being gay doesn't mean they're interesting. Doesn't mean anything, I've decided. Great minds. I decided that recently too. Can I go with you one night? As soon as you're free. Rodney performs every Saturday and sometimes on Wednesdays. Sebastian promised to take Reginald to the river where Jack had rescued him, then mentioned vaguely how well he was getting on with Con Achilles, but didn't tell about their nude fight. Reginald reckoned he should drop wrestling and join karate because it was much more useful. Equals I'm too dumb. All those katas you have to learn, and shouting and prancing around makes me feel stupid. I tried it for a while but could never remember the moves. Equals you get used to it. And if you persevere, after a while the kata moves become like reflexes, so you don't have to think no matter what someone does or where they attack from. There's just an instantaneous defensive response. Wrestling's useless in a real-world fight. No one's going to stand there and obey the rules, they just slam a metal bar into the back of your head. Equals I agree karate's probably more useful, but I don't want to let Mr. Achilles down. Equals yeah, I understand. The karate bloke's okay, not as friendly as Achilles, but a damned good teacher. I'm going to enter the secondary school's karate competition, and last weekend I successfully smashed the nose of someone who tried to steal my mobile phone outside the post office. Equals Reggie. That's brilliant. Equals yep, I'm a dangerous man, Seb. You're lucky you've got a killer on your side. Together we'll outface the world. Sebastian leaned over and kissed his friend gently. A soft brushing of the lips. Reginald immediately got a hard-on and giggled. Equals I'd completely forgotten we were naked. It's great, isn't it? I understand now why you do it. It was excellent swimming naked the other day too. Equals join me at lunch times. Equals if I was as beautiful as you. Equals you are beautiful. They wrestled lightly, kissed some more, then settled to exploration and sweet nuzzling until finally the pressure became too much and they ejaculated simultaneously, each holding the other's erection, lips glued together. Equals that was much better than I ever imagined it would be. Equals me too, Sebastian whispered. Equals it's nothing like what I've done before. That was just playing around. This feels serious. I think I'm in love. I wish it was you sharing my bed tomorrow. Equals it will be soon. We'll sort this out, don't worry. Equals you're not jealous. Equals of course not. If you love me, I trust you. If I can't trust you, then you're not worth loving. It's simple. In the morning they pleasured each other again and promised eternal friendship and love. Chapter 6. Half an hour after Sebastian returned from school the following day he heard a car. Ensuring he was invisible to anyone in the garage below, he watched from the pool pump house as a car drove down the ramp. The garage doors closed and Jack got out, followed by an obviously nervous, naked young man. Equals Jack, I'm sure this can't be right. I'm perfectly well now and don't need to spend a week with some snotty-nosed teenager. And seriously, you can't expect me to just go in naked. Equals it's all part of your psychological grounding. The doctor explained it to you. Only when you feel equally at ease naked as clothed, are you strong enough to shake off the effects of your experience and ready for the job Mr. Fartbook has lined up for you. The reason so many soldiers suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder is they only get psychological counseling. The physical side is ignored. You have yet to feel completely at ease with other males, and that will only happen when you've spent at least a week in intimate physical contact with someone like Sebastian. Equals tomorrow I'll take you and Sebastian to a forest for a weekend of rough living. If you get through that, then you're on the way to recovery. Now go through that door and up the stairs and press the bell to the left of the inner door. When the fellow had closed the lower door behind him, Jack used his remote to open the garage doors and backed out. The bell rang and Sebastian walked slowly to open it. The new guest, who looked to be in his early 20s, held out a trembling hand. Equals hi, I'm Guapo Dauntless. Equals Sebastian sans père. They shook hands and Sebastian liked the firm, dry grip. Equals I'm glad you're naked too. Otherwise I'd feel silly. Equals why? You've a good body. Equals thanks. Equals fancy a swim. Equals you bet they wandered through to Sebastian's bedroom so Guapo could orientate, then out to the patio and pool. Guapo dived in, then swam to the side, face in pain. Equals fuck. My balls. Sebastian laughed. Equals you've got to keep your legs apart so they have somewhere to go and don't smash against your legs when the water hits them. I also learned the hard way. Equals bastard, you could have warned me. After an hour of swimming lengths in silence they lay on the grass beside the pool. Guapo stretched out in the sun to refurbish his tan. Sebastian considered himself quite dark enough and lay in the shade, studying his guest. Medium height, stocky and solidly built. Good, lightly hairy legs. A patch of hair in the middle of his chest wasn't attractive. Everything else was on the average side of average. No spare tire. Face round rather than oval with widely spaced eyes, and the back of his head was flat. A good nose and strong, thick neck. Jawline a little weak, although the mouth was firm. Guapo turned his head and fixed cold gray eyes on his host. Equals what are you staring at? Tonight's fuck. Is that what this is all about? Free fucks for the boss's favorite son. Equals do you want me to fuck you? Equals no. Equals then I won't. And I'm not the boss's favorite anything. I detest fartbook. He's my mother's boss and we do as he tells us. According to jackets to help you recover. Equals yes, I've had all the psychological shit, thanks. Is this your first time? Equals no, you're the 10th. Equals and does it work? Equals seems to. At least when the guys leave here they all seem reasonably well balanced and no longer have nightmares. Equals and after that? Equals good question. None have ever contacted me again, even though we became friends. Equals you're not bad looking. Great body. I'm jealous. Equals you're much stronger than me. How old are you? Equals 24. And you? Equals just turned 17. Usually the guys we take in are around my age, runaways who've been set on by thugs. You're too old to fit that category. What happened? Equals I've no idea. I'm a freelance photographer from Melbourne. Been here 3 months. I was working on a photo essay about winter in the tropics when I noticed a large number of obviously wealthy Oriental men arriving and departing from a 5-star hotel at the northern end of the Esplanade. Sometimes the stretch limos were queuing up. Whenever I had a spare moment I'd go there and see what was happening, hoping for a story to back up the photos. Equals there seemed to be 2 sorts of guests. Some were overfed and healthy, others appeared almost dead. Trying to look like a tourist with a camera, I took photos and noted their movements. There were always several sexy young men and women in the foyers, and after a short wait they would be summoned upstairs where they stayed about an hour. I guess they were call girls and escorts. Rather them than me. The sickly tourists usually left the same day in an unmarked ambulance. It was odd. And I was sure there was a good story if I could piece the bits together, but one evening a couple of shaven-headed thugs punched me in the guts, shoved a bag over my head, thrust me into a car and took me to a concrete room somewhere. I don't know how long I was tied up, sometimes used as a punch bag or dartboard when they got bored. They didn't wear masks and seemed not to want anything. I told them my parents were poor so there was no hope of a ransom, but they just said to shut the fuck up or they'd sew my lips together. They would have to. Guapo looked away, swallowed and sniffed slightly, determined not to cry. Sebastian remained silent in an agony of pity. No one should be treated like that. Equals I see their faces in nightmares, so apologies in advance. I'd given up hope of surviving when One night the place was busted by cops in black gear and balaclavas who said they'd been watching these guys for a while and were expecting drugs, not a naked, near corpse. They took me to a private hospital where I met the unlovely but generous benefactor of lost boys, Mr. Fartbook, and was sewn back together by his excellent doctor and taken care of for a few weeks by a couple of male nurses. Then Jack arrived yesterday and briefed me on the next stage of my recovery, promising a job at the end if I did as I was told. End of story. So that's how you got those, Sebastian said, pointing at a multitude of almost healed scars on Guapo's back and belly. Yeah. They're fading fast. The doctor says they'll be invisible in a week. Mostly whip cuts. Punctures from darts, cuts, and cigarette burns. Except for this, he pointed to a narrow dark red scar. I was lucky to have been found in time, the doctor reckons. This was a deep stab that nearly punctured my stomach. If the acid had leaked, I'd have digested myself. I was hungry enough. Having had nothing but dry bread and water. What did they want? Sex. That's the strange thing. They did nothing except hurt me on the few times they came in. Didn't ask for anything. Not even my name. At the time I didn't think about it, but now it's beginning to really bug me. Who were they and why? And there was something about those cops that didn't ring true. What? No idea, but something. Seb put his fingers to his lips. Hear that? It's Mum's car entering the garage. Come on, I want to show you something. They crouched in the dark pump house and watched Desol get out of the car, lean back in and press the remote to close the door, then totter towards the stairs. That's my mother. She looks really old and tired. Will you go and open the door for her? No way. She's made no noise, so how would I know she was there? This spy hole is a secret. No one must ever know they can be seen from here. Understood. Yes, sir, sorry sir. It's no joke. Promise. Shocked by Sebastian's intensity, Guapo nodded anxiously. I promise, I really promise. Desol rang caterers who brought a 3-course meal on disposable plates. She decorated the table with candles, opened a bottle of white wine, and played the perfect hostess until, pleading a headache, she left the boys to clean up and amuse themselves. Guapo lay on the bed and watched TV while Sebastian did his homework because there'd not be time over the weekend. After a short swim, they retired to bed and Sebastian worked his magic as a masseur. It had never failed before, and didn't fail this time. Within half an hour Guapo was asleep, lying on his back and snoring slightly. At about 2 in the morning, Sebastian was wakened by muffled cries and whimpering. He rolled over and stroked and cuddled and cajoled until they both fell back to sleep. In the morning he was awoken by someone sucking softly on his erection. Guapo looked up, embarrassed. Sorry. You really are too beautiful to ignore, and I was suddenly hungry, and having read that semen is full of nutrients and vitamins and protein, Sebastian was silent. Look, I'm really sorry. Please forgive me. Not unless you finish what you started. Sebastian's whimpers of release were overheard by his mother, who was drinking her morning coffee on the patio outside the open French windows of her son's bedroom. Her smug, self-satisfied smile would have earned her a punch on the nose, had anyone been there to see it. After breakfast they were driven by Jack to a private rainforest, part of Fartbook's domain, and dumped, bare-arsed and footed, to make their way to a hut where they'd find food and somewhere to sleep. It had been raining, so Jack took off in a spray of mud, leaving the two intrepid explorers to wonder if they'd been foolish to agree to the tramping holiday. Dense cloud prevented severe sunburn, but the humidity and temperatures were so high it was like wading through the steam room. Of a Turkish bath. After warning Guapo about snakes that looked like sticks, leeches, and the terrible Gympie bush, Dendrochnid moroides whose silica-tipped leaves cause agonizing stings that last for months, they followed an overgrown trail towards the escarpment. A stiff climb through giant granite boulders brought them to the top of a ridge where they inspected stubbed toes, grazes and sore feet before admiring the view of treetops and the sea shimmering on the horizon. A pinkish haze indicated the city. Only bird calls and cicadas broke the silence. It's liberating, isn't it? Guapo said with a slow smile. What? Hiking naked, carrying nothing, not even matches or a knife. It makes us as free as wild animals. And it isn't even embarrassing knowing you're looking up my arse as we climb. It's an attractive arse, no hemorrhoids or dags, so what's to be embarrassed about? As for being like wild animals, they don't have food and shelter waiting for them at the end of the trail, they have to search and kill their own. Spoil sport. But you know what I mean. I've known it since I could crawl, but few people understand liberty, let alone desire it. You're right. They can't wait to join the scouts, the footy team, get a steady job, spouse and 2 kids, house in the suburbs, giant mortgage, pension fund, and life insurance. Not to mention funeral insurance. Okay, I won't mention it. The track led down to a watercourse and several small pools, enough to drink from and splash each other cool. Another, much steeper climb to an even higher ridge had Guapo staggering. It shames me to admit it, but this is the first time I've ever been bushwalking. And I'm nowhere near as fit as you. You've been ill, so take it easy, I don't want to have to carry you. It seemed further than Sebastian remembered, perhaps because Guapo's blistered feet and exhaustion were slowing them down, but his guest lived up to his name and remained undaunted. Uncomplaining and cheerful, insisting he was happy just to be alive in this wonderful spot. I don't care if I drop dead at this moment, he said softly when they paused to admire the view. And listen to the birds. This place is so beautiful I'd dream enchanted thoughts through eternity. I like you, Guapo dauntless, Sebastian said seriously. I like you too, Sebastian Sanspierre, his new friend said equally seriously. They were hungry, thirsty, and tired when the tiny stone cabin appeared round a bend in the track. A long soak in a waterhole just below the building relieved most of the itches, soreness, and dust, and then they devoured a plateful each of cold meat, bread, and papaya, leaving boiled eggs, bread and bananas for breakfast. Exhaustion set in soon after darkness and they fell asleep on top of the large blanket. In the middle of the night it became chilly so they wrapped themselves in it and slept till dawn. I had no nightmares, Guapo announced proudly the following morning. This therapy seems to be working. Sebastian only smiled. After breakfast and a lengthy dip in the pool they set off again. This time there was a swamp to wade through, leeches to scrape off, mosquitoes to murder, biting ants and a patch of scratchy lantana to get through before they arrived at another pool large enough to swim in. Then it was easy walking downhill to the edge of the forest. I don't want to leave the trees, Guapo said sadly. I hate the idea of civilization and other people. I want to live for the rest of my life in the forest. I was born several thousand years too late. At the bottom of a long slope lay a sprawling house. Square, white stucco, modern, like a sterile sarcophagus dumped on the stony earth. As they approached they could see half a dozen men in shorts lounging under umbrellas round a pool, being served by waiters in dinner suits, and guarded by 6 over-muscled pugilists in jeans and t-shirts, guns visible in shoulder holsters. That's odd. Usually the place is empty and Jack's waiting. They'd been seen, so had no alternative but to let themselves through the gate in the fence. Around the pool area The 6 men and their minder stared at them silently. Ah, Sebastian, Mr. Fartbook wheezed as he wandered out of the house. In a suit he was flabby. In nothing but flowered baggy shorts and unflattering sunlight he was a dietitian's nightmare. A heart attack with a great dropsicle head and 2 fat pearly hands. Between the rolls of flesh that surrounded them, looked out 2 black eyes speaking of avarice and cruelty. A mean and miserable soul that had refused itself nothing was imprisoned in all that lard. He was his own bitter jailer, but thought himself fortunate. Don't go in the pool. You're both filthy. Come in and get those scratches attended to and take a shower. Where's Jack? Held up. His tone did not invite further questions, so Sebastian and Guapo followed Fartbook inside. Where Gerald, a nurse from the hospital, directed them to the showers and afterwards put disinfectant on scratches and rubbed soothing cream into bruised feet. You're bloody fit, the pair of you, he said admiringly. I can't believe you, Guapo, it's only 2 weeks since you were looking like death warmed up. Thanks to you and the others, Guapo smiled. I can't tell you how grateful I am. Grateful enough to do a little something for me, I hope, wheezed Fartbook as he came into the bathroom. Anything, Guapo declared without thinking. Good. Come with me. They went to a well-appointed bedroom along the corridor where a bulbous oriental of about 45 was lying naked on the bed. This is Mr. Chai, Fartbook said unctuously. He saw you arrive and wants to get to know you. I said you'd be delighted to let him. He comes from Huangchao, a most interesting city. I'll leave you to get acquainted. He left, closing the door behind him. Blood drained from Guapo's system. He began to shiver. He'd sometimes wondered how young guys could bear to let old men slobber over them for money. He wasn't even sure he was gay. Despite having performed fellatio on Sebastian that morning, he still didn't understand how he'd dared, putting it down to post-traumatic stress. He'd never had the slightest interest in girls or other men, so assumed he was asexual. This gigantic puddle of lard on the bed was so utterly repellent. Guapo felt sick and terrified. Come here, leered the reclining Buddha from his couch, extending an arm and beckoning seductively. Like an automaton, Guapo shuffled forward. With a surprising turn of speed, Mr. Chai reached out and grasped his prey's penis. I am going to fuck you, he said calmly. Get down on your knees. Guapo's senses finally switched on, and without thinking he wrapped both hands round the neck of his would-be raper and squeezed until his penis was released. Mr. Chai, eyes bulging in shock, turned to the wall and slammed his hand on a button that summoned Fartbook and a giant bodyguard who grabbed Guapo, shoved an arm up his back and put a throttle hold round his neck. He tried to kill me, screeched the furious man. Kill him. I will kill him, personally, said Fartbook softly after Guapo had been dragged out. And I'll send you his testicles and a video to prove it. His guest's smile was evil. Sebastian was furious when he saw Guapo being manhandled, and ordered the guard to release him. He was obeyed, albeit reluctantly. Fartbook's goons were never sure about Sebastian's status. A fat pig wanted to fuck me, Guapo said breathlessly. I couldn't. I know I said I'd do anything, but I couldn't. He turned to Fartbook who had just entered. I'm sorry, Mr. Fartbook, I really wanted to do something for you but, I couldn't. I'm not a prostitute and never want to be. To everyone's surprise, Fartbook patted him on the shoulder and said not to worry, it was a terrible misunderstanding. Someone had told him Guapo had been an escort, so it was Fartbook who should apologize. His smile, which exposed too many perfectly arranged teeth, never faltered. as he suggested that Guapo and Sebastian should leave quietly and wait down by the gate. Guapo remained despondent and felt alarmingly vulnerable standing naked by a gateway in the middle of nowhere. All joy in the weekend adventure dissipated as the two young men mulled over the unpleasant incident. Sebastian didn't trust Fartbook, but kept his fears to himself until Jack finally arrived to take them home. When he learned what had happened, Jack laughed and said not to worry, but Sebastian and Guapo were unable to stop worrying. Will we tell your mother? Sebastian thought for a few seconds. No way. I don't trust her. She's too thick with fat. Fartbook. Chapter 7. In bed the following morning, Sebastian impressed again on Guapo the need for extreme caution. He shouldn't do or say anything that might upset anyone. Jack would be spending part of the day with him, and he seemed a good bloke, but you never really know about people, so Guapo should treat everyone as an enemy until proven otherwise. After breakfast, Desol was unnaturally bright and cheerful. Sebastian prepared for school, but was unprepared for his mother to walk out to the street with him and wave goodbye and watch as he cycled away. If he'd been less preoccupied with thoughts of his father, he'd have been suspicious. Since overhearing Rex Trovert at the pool, Sebastian had been determined to confide in him, but when and how? He had practiced the words, tried to imagine how his teacher would feel, and was prepared to act very cool and matter-of-fact in case of rejection. He wasn't asking anything of him, he just needed to know that Rex really was his father and wasn't upset at knowing Sebastian was his son. The trouble was, the more he thought about it, the more complicated it seemed. Perhaps he should just let sleeping dogs lie. As soon as the bell rang for lunch he headed for the library, interrupting his quarry in his office as he was opening his sandwiches. Excuse me for barging in on your lunch, sir, but have you time to talk? At your service, Sebastian. I want to apologize for taking your clothes last Thursday. Rex's eyebrows shot up in surprise. It was you. We guessed it was that fellow Jason Boyilov. But I never imagined you'd be in on it. I wasn't really. I was with Rodney when he saw you both heading for the pool. It was a spur of the moment thing for him and I just tagged along, nothing planned. Rodney was still angry at Boyilov's reaction when he spoke to him, but he holds no grudges and has no intention of bringing it all up again. That's generous of him. Sebastian laughed. Not really. He feels sorry for Boyilov because he's got so fat and ugly and is in a dead-end job. In retrospect he did Rodney a good turn, encouraging him to leave school where he was doomed to failure, and by leaving town he got shot of his ultra-religious parents and is now doing very nicely, drives a Mercedes Sports. But that's not what I want to talk about. I overheard you talking about that woman who was sitting next to the principal that afternoon. How she'd forced you to have sex with her. Well, you certainly lead with your chin, young man. Mr. Trovert sat straighter in his chair. Suspicious. On guard. What on earth has it to do with you? A lot, I think. I've worked out it was just on 17 years ago, is that right? Sebastian. This is too bad. You have no right to probe me on this. Get out. Sebastian turned at the door and the pleading in his eyes made Rex relent. Okay, he admitted. It was about 17 years ago. Why? And the woman's name was Desol. Yes, I don't remember her surname. How do you know? She's my mother. I was conceived 17 years ago, and my skin's the same color as yours. And, Sebastian turned away to hide tears that were streaming. Rex Trovert was silent for several long minutes. That means. Yes. If it were true, the teacher said slowly, how would you feel about it? Equals so relieved. I can't tell you how I've wanted to know who my father was, but dreaded knowing. Mum always said she'd been raped by a masked man. I haven't believed her for years, but still I imagined a brood. Instead, it seems I might have you, and honestly I can't think of anyone I'd sooner have as a father. He swallowed back his tears and asked nervously, equals how about you? Equals I don't want to offend you, Sebastian, but I must say I cannot imagine how an ugly, evil old witch like Desole could have produced and raised the most pleasant and interesting young man it's been my good fortune to know. Equals so, you don't mind? Equals mind? I'm over the moon. Can't wait to tell Fee, my partner. Equals Fee. Equals short for Phoebe. Equals partner. Does that mean you're not married? Equals we can't see any reason to, and it's better for her business if she keeps her own name. Equals which is? Equals Lynn. Equals Fee Lynn. I like it. Equals you'll like her too. Equals won't she mind about me? Equals we decided not to have kids because of the state of the planet and all that doom and gloom stuff, but it's been difficult living with that decision, especially for her. She's a born mother. She'll love you. When can you come and meet her? Equals as soon as I'm invited. So you're sure I'm your son? Equals Jason mentioned our matching balls, and the boss once said we looked like brothers. And even if you aren't, I still want you to be. Okay. Sebastian's tears gushed, accompanied by racking silent sobs that shook his frame. Rex came round from behind his desk, wrapped his arms around his son and rocked him gently as if he were a baby. When the tears stopped, he handed Sebastian a handkerchief, supervised the blowing of nose and wiping away of the tearful evidence, then suggested they go for a swim. Equals is it okay if I join Sebastian's club in the pool? Rex asked Mr. Sprague, who laughed, nodded, placed a finger beside his nose and winked obscenely. Equals he thinks we're on together, like he is with Charles, Rex confided as they stripped, leaving their clothes outside the office. Equals are they? Equals so the gossip goes. Who cares? They're both boring farts and deserve each other. Equals you're not homophobic, then? Sebastian asked nervously. Equals hardly. Not with a gay son. Equals how did you know? Equals I've a seventh sense. Loud cheers greeted them as they walked to the edge. Rex was clearly nervous, wondering if he'd just destroyed his reputation, but needn't have. Worried, if possible he ended up even more popular than before. At least half the swimmers were also naked and crowded round them in the water telling jokes, doing honeypots to try to drown him, and before long he even dared the diving board where he showed good form. Equals do we tell people? Sebastian asked as they were dressing. Equals do you want to? Equals not their business. Equals agreed. Except for Mr. Noel, after all he's your friend. Equals how do you know? I'm beginning to have doubts about a father who knows more about me than I do. Equals I've seen you two talking. Only friends are so easy together, just as the way Reginald looks at you is broadcasting to everyone who cares that he's in love. Is it reciprocated? Equals yes. But you're dangerous. I'm going to have to be careful near you. And what'll I call you? Daddy? Pops? Father? Equals you dare and I'll disown you. Sir or Mr. Trovert at school, Rex everywhere else. No point in setting tongues wagging. They swapped mobile phone numbers, shook hands, and parted with great fat grins plastered over their faces. Reginald was as pleased as Sebastian when he heard the news, and the afternoon passed in a glow of happiness. With a light heart Sebastian unlocked the door under the stairs and prepared the mats for wrestling practice. Con Achilles arrived a few minutes later. They stripped and Sebastian whistled appreciatively. Equals you look great. All your muscles are visible now. You look 100 times better and years younger. What did you use? Number 1. Equals if that's what it's called. I bought some electric hair clippers, put on the shortest spacer and ran them over everything. Feels much better, I have to admit, and no hairs in the shower. Sebastian ran his left hand over Khan's chest. Equals bristles, they feel sexy. I can see your nipples now. Khan's smile was a little forced and very nervous. Should he object? He decided to go with the flow as Sebastian's hand slid down his belly to his groin and ruffled the bristles that the previous week had been a bush. Equals no hairs to grab. Spoil sport. I'll have to grab here instead, he laughed, taking a firm hold of his teacher's rapidly firming manhood. Khan held his breath, making a determined effort to remain open-minded and not leap to conclusions. No man had ever touched his penis, let alone grabbed hold of it. It was so bloody. Intimate. He forced himself to relax and discovered to his surprise that it wasn't unpleasant. Equals your cock's gigantic, Sebastian said in admiration. Equals not longer than mine but at least twice as thick. Do you use 2 hands to wank? I'll bet your fiancé loves it. Khan gazed down at his erection, wondered if he ought to be embarrassed, but decided to accept the fact that he wasn't. Equals my fiancé's never mentioned it? I don't think she's very impressed. Equals what? Is she blind to beauty? Immune to magnificence, Sebastian reached round with his other hand and stroked Khan's buttocks. Equals more sexy bristles. Did you do your ring too? Bend over. Blushing to the roots of his bristles, Khan bent over. Equals yep, his cheeky pupil announced, equals neat and clean. No dags. At that moment Khan farted and Sebastian leaped back laughing wildly. Equals it spoke to me. Your arse spoke to me. I saw the lips move. Got really foul breath though, he rolled on the ground laughing hysterically. Collapsing onto the mat and laughing in relief, Khan wondered why he didn't feel embarrassed. Why everything Sebastian did seemed normal. Why was it that with everyone else he knew he felt he had to be on his guard? Why had none of the women he'd had sex with praised his hard-earned muscles? Why had no woman ever wanted to stroke his chest, belly, cock, and bum like Sebastian had just done in fun? Why hadn't any of his girlfriends wanted to look at his arse and watch him fart? He was expected to admire them, ply them with endless compliments, tell them how sexy they were, get down and lick their cunts that usually smelled like arseholes. Why did he always feel he hadn't quite come up to scratch with any of the women he dated, including his fiancée? Why was he always feeling that he should be apologizing for something and buying them flowers in expiation of some nameless failing? Why was he engaged to someone who clearly appreciated him less than one of his pupils did? His brain felt as if someone had doused it in iced water, because that was a bloody good question and demanded an answer. Unaware of the effect he was having, Sebastian straightened the mats. Equals okay, teach, time to wrestle. Let's get down and dirty. Equals there's something I want to discuss with you first. Equals sounds serious. Equals could be. I've been debating whether to tell you, but I think it's too important to ignore. Take a look at these. He opened his briefcase and took out 2 magazines, each open to a page of colored photographs. Equals where'd you get them? Equals my cousin the pool guard collects gay porn from all over the world. He showed me these from India because I told him I knew the guy in the yellow pouch. Sebastian studied a photo of 2 adolescents kissing while playing with each other's erections. Equals it's me and, I forget his name, one of the first guys who stayed with us. Jan, I think. But how did it get in this magazine? Equals and this. A different young man was performing fellatio on Sebastian, whose head was thrust back in apparent ecstasy. Equals MMM. That's me again. Can't recognize the other bloke with his head down, but that's my bed. Khan took out his laptop, opened it and turned it on. Equals Uri emailed me this internet link today. The video started and Sebastian was astonished to see himself performing one of his dances, culminating in the pose where he ejaculated. Equals that's the dance I told you about in our lounge. I guess one of the guests put it on the web. Equals aren't you worried? Sebastian thought for a bit. Equals could be a problem if any unsympathetic people see it. But what interests me is how they got photos of me in my bed. Equals I've one more video. The scene was Sebastian's patio. He and Guapo were horsing around at the edge of the pool. They did nothing sexual, but it was a sexy scene. Khan paused it on a still of Guapo. Sebastian was utterly confused. Equals that was last Friday. The day Guapo arrived. He's staying with us for a week. Equals he's a very beautiful young man. Equals not so young, 24. Equals he looks like a really nice guy. Equals he is. We hiked through bush for 2 days and although he wasn't fully recovered from being bashed up and imprisoned and was covered in cuts and bruises, he never complained. Always cheerful, even with a dozen leeches sucking on his scrotum. The best guest we've had. Equals I'd like to meet him. Equals and you shall. Sebastian looked at Khan and laughed. Equals Mr. Achilles, you're looking at that photo like a soppy puppy. Are you in love with Guapo? Khan snapped to attention, shook his head and said far too violently, equals of course not. I don't know the guy. He just looks equals lovable. Equals yes, no. Nice. Equals he is. But back to these photos and videos, who the heck took them? Equals whoever did isn't worried you'll find out. Equals there must be hidden cameras everywhere. Mum must know about it. I'll bet Jack set it up. He's always there when I'm not. Sebastian was silent while Khan put the magazines and laptop away. Equals what's the time? Equals 4 o'clock, why? Equals I told Guapo I'd be back at 5 and I don't want to be late. I've a bad feeling about this. He had a run-in with Fartbook yesterday. Equals what about? Equals Fartbook wanted him to be fucked by a Chinese bloke as payment for his rescue and stay in hospital. Guapo refused and that pissed Fartbook off big time. Khan couldn't contain his outrage. Equals if this Fartbook fellow is trying to force Guapo into prostitution he has to be stopped. Call the police. Sebastian looked at Khan in astonishment. Equals the cops? This is Queensland, Khan, where the police murder aborigines with impunity, beat up innocent tourists and kill suspects with tasers for fun. They're probably behind it all. Get real. No cops. Equals okay. I just thought I'd better make the suggestion. As it happens I agree with you. But I'm surprised you seem so unconcerned about having your intimate encounters and private bits exposed for all the world to admire. Equals I'm bloody not unconcerned. I'm furious and really worried for Guapo, but we've got time for a couple of bouts. Come on, let's wrestle. It'll settle my mind and put me in the mood to do something. They faced each other, hands on knees. The timer rang and the thud as they crashed into each other must have been heard out in the hallway. Sebastian's concentration paid off and he easily floored a distracted and worried Khan. In the next bout, heavy breathing and grunting prevented them from hearing a key turning in the lock and the door opening. Standing in the shadows under the stairs, Mr. Noel and Guapo, loins inexpertly wrapped in a beach towel, stared in astonishment at two naked bodies straining audibly in the pool of light created by a 60-watt lamp. Khan was behind Sebastian, arms wrapped round his waist having just heaved him into the air. Sebastian's arms and legs whirred wildly until the pair fell forward, Con on top of Sebastian, who prevented his opponent from rolling him by planting himself firmly on hands and knees. Con reached between his opponent's legs and lifted with all his strength, flipping Sebastian onto his back with a thump as the timer rang and they collapsed, laughing. Thought you were going to grab my cods, Con. I would have if my hand had slipped. You were lucky not to be emasculated. Lucky indeed, the principal said quietly. The two wrestlers sat up in surprise. I had no idea wrestling was so rough. Are you all right, Sebastian? That fall looked painful. Looks worse than it is. I didn't feel a thing. What are you doing here? And Guapo? I apologize for interrupting your practice, but this young man is desperate to see you. Guapo seemed much more in need of sympathy than Sebastian. He was pale and shaking. Sebastian shot to his feet. Guapo, what is it? Why are you here? Where's Jack? After many assurances that he was safe, the story emerged. Shortly after Sebastian's mother had left for work, Guapo heard a vehicle enter the garage. Curious, he spied from the pump housing and watched an unmarked, windowless van pull into the garage. From the back doors emerged the same two thugs who had attacked him on the esplanade and imprisoned and tortured him for 2 weeks. When Fartbook climbed out of the passenger seat, Guapo's utter panic and dread of recapture spurred him to make the superhuman leap to the top of the 3-meter-high rear wall where he hung by his fingers, then hauled himself over, dropping 5 meters to the neighbor's lawn and straining his ankle. Oblivious to the pain, he grabbed a towel off the clothesline, crawled under their windows so they wouldn't see him, and on reaching the street girded his loins and raced away. Imagining Sebastian was part of the plot, he headed for the backpacker hostel he'd been staying at, then remembered he owed them money, had no identification, no cash, nothing. What to do? Fearing the police as much as Fartbook, he hid all day under bushes in a park, drinking water from the public fountain and nursing his ankle. As the afternoon ground on, he accepted that his only hope was to trust his instincts and find Sebastian. His towel attracted little attention in a city that lived on tourism. People imagined he was walking back from the Esplanade Lagoon. Unfortunately, though, everyone he asked for directions seemed to be a tourist, so it was late before he finally found the school, which was closed. Luckily, Mrs. Noel had seen him from her house and dispatched her husband. His tale told, Guapo swayed on his feet and it was Con who caught him, lowered him to the ground and cradled him in his arms. Guapo buried his face in Con's chest and tried not to cry. Mr. Noel turned to Sebastian. This sounds dangerous, Sebastian. The young man seems honest, so I'll leave you and Con to decide what to do. If you need my help, ask for it. But the fewer people who know your plans, the better. Should I phone your mother? Fuck no. Sorry sir, but I'm pretty sure she's part of this. I can always go to my father for help. Your father. Rex Trovert. Mr. Noel's face split in a grin. I always thought so. Oh, what excellent news. I gather it's a secret. Yes, for now at least. Excellent news. Excellent news, the principal muttered as he let himself out and the lock clicked into place. Con and Guapo were whispering. Con telling him not to worry, he'd take care of him. He looked up with a bemused smile. So, you're Rex Trovert's son. Yes. Figures. Why is it a secret? We've only just discovered it ourselves. I'll tell you about it when this is all solved. Con nodded, looked down and smiled goofily. Guapo smiled back, then reached up and touched Con lightly on the cheek. I believe Guapo, Con announced seriously, and have decided to take him home with me. He'll Be safe there. No one knows I know him and you've discovered he's even better in the flesh than in the video. Khan shook his head as if to clear it and smiled down at the young man in his arms. No, no. It's just that I want to make sure he's safe and Konia's Achilles, you're in love. Have you forgotten you're an almost married man? No. But it's your fault if I've changed my mind. How? By making me think about my relationship with women in general and my fiancée in particular. Ha? You're going to replace her with Guapo. An excellent decision, old man. Guapo, do you take Khan as your friend and possible lover? Guapo looked up with a nervous grin. Well, I wasn't really looking for an older man, but I guess he'll do. Cheeky bastard. I'm only a bit older than you. But so sexy and much more mature. Khan bent and kissed him on the forehead. Well, are you coming home with me or not? Yes, please. Khan looked at Sebastian with a grin. That's settled. Now what about you? I'll go home as usual and be surprised that Guapo's not there. Then when the place is empty I'll find those cameras and smash them. After that I'll take whatever I want and call Rex to come and collect me. It's his turn to take care of the unfortunate youth he sired. Not a good idea, oh hot-headed youth. Why not? Do we want to discover what's behind all this cloak and dagger life you've been living for the last 17 years? I guess. Then after discovering the hidden cameras and anything else that might be useful, act exactly the same as normal, as if you know nothing, otherwise they'll cover their tracks and disappear. Extra good advice. So, after I've discovered useful things I'll find a way to destroy these bastards. With the help of your friends, Sebastian sans pair. No mad plans to single-handedly take on the criminal fraternity. Okay. By the way, I've changed my name to Trovert. Trovert it is, and together we'll solve the riddle. Meanwhile, take care. You too. And you, Guapo. Thanks, Sebastian. Chapter 8. No one was home when Sebastian arrived, so he showered, did his homework, made a bite to eat, did a casual circuit of the garden, surreptitiously working out where a camera must have been to take the photos of him and Guapo beside the pool, noticed from the corner of an eye a sprinkler at the edge of the Rigby that seemed larger than normal, felt the soil nearby, nodded his head as if making a decision, turned on the sprinklers and wandered back, noting with satisfaction that no water spouted from the one he'd suspected. After a quick dip in the pool he turned the sprinklers off, then settled down in the lounge to watch TV news. At 7:30 Desol arrived looking harassed. Sebastian looked up with an easy smile. You look exhausted, Mum, you work too hard. Sit down and I'll get you a drink. Wordlessly she sank into an armchair, accepting the large gin and tonic with a pathetic sniff. Where you been? And where's Guapo? I was going to play chess with him tonight after he beat me yesterday. I reckon Jack's working him too hard after our hike last weekend. I know it took it out of him. What happened up at Mr. Fartbook's place? Nothing. We had a much needed shower after wading through a swamp. Then Fartbook asked Guapo to keep a bloke company, but he said he was too tired, apparently. I wasn't there. Did Guapo say anything else about it? Nope. Then Mr. Fartbook came out to see us off. He was very pleasant. I didn't realize he was such a great guy. We had a fantastic weekend, thanks to him. Guapo told him again that he was really grateful to have been rescued and patched up for nothing in the hospital, and felt bad at disappointing him, but he really was on his last legs by then. Desol was silent. Equals what's this all about? Where's Guapo? Has something happened to him? Come on mum, I really like that guy. Desol shook her head irritably. Equals no, dear, nothing's happened. It's just that a job came up sooner than expected, so Guapo had to leave suddenly. That's all. It being a very long time since his mother had called him equals dear, Sebastian knew she was up to something. Equals did he leave a note? How can I contact him? He wouldn't just leave without leaving a note at least. Equals well, it looks as if he did. Just like all those other boys. No gratitude, that's the trouble with the world. It's all take, 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 but never give anything. I'll ask Mr. Fartbook next time I see him if he has a contact address for you. Equals thanks, Mum. That'd be great. Pleading exhaustion, Desol went to her room. Sebastian watched a video of the state wrestling finals, then stood for some time outside looking at the stars. When he finally got into bed, he took great care not to look as if he was aware of hidden cameras. However, knowing he was probably being watched by dozens of heavy-breathing sex-starved voyeurs was rather amusing, so before switching out the light he gave a stellar performance. As soon as Sebastian left the wrestling room, Khan drove his car from the car park to the quadrangle, where a door led directly to the main staircase. The school was deserted, but even so he checked the way was clear, then led Guapo in his towel to the car, buried him under a blanket in the back, locked the door to the wrestling room and drove sedately to his house in a beach suburb about 5 kilometers north of the city. Parking in the garage, he lowered the doors before Guapo clambered out and was led inside for a shower, food, and rest. Suddenly nervous and unsure about the wisdom of bringing a stranger home and promising to protect him, Khan spent some time cleaning the kitchen, preparing something to eat and inventing unnecessary tasks. Unable to delay it any longer, he stood at the door of his bedroom and marveled at the young man sprawled over the bed, snoring lightly. He tiptoed over and lay carefully beside him. Guapo woke and stretched out a hand, stroking Khan's cheek. Equals you're beautiful. Khan blushed and shook his head. Equals you are beautiful and incredibly generous to take me in. Khan's smile was uncertain. The feelings that had prompted him to invite Guapo to stay had vanished and he was unsure if he still wanted it. What the fuck had made him kiss the bloke and stroke him like a lovesick poof? What must old Noel be thinking? He blushed in shame. What if it was all a mistake? Bloody Sebastian, he thought, when he's there everything, no matter how bizarre or unusual, seems normal and sensible. With Sebastian there are no worries or fears, you feel able to deal with whatever life throws at you. But Sebastian wasn't there now and Khan wasn't sure what he wanted, or if what he wanted was a good idea. Or if Guapo gazed at his rescuer and realized the problem. He stretched out a hand and touched Khan's fingers. Equals you're having second thoughts? It's okay, I understand. It was all rather crazy and theatrical and we both got carried away. So if it's okay with you I'll just borrow a few clothes and go. He sat up. Panic gripped Khan's heart as the truth of the situation rammed home. Equals no, he said far too loudly. Equals no. Don't go. I want you here. I just have to get used to the idea. Equals what idea? Equals that I was engaged to a woman this morning, and this evening have a naked, handsome young man in my bed who I don't want to leave. Guapo smiled uncertainly. Equals if you're certain. Equals I am, definitely. Guapo's smile morphed into a luminous grin. Equals then I won't leave. As if controlled by the same puppet master they turned to each other and shared delicate, tentative kisses that became delicate but not so tentative touches. A delicious calm spread over Khan that he'd never felt before. This felt right. This was what he wanted and had wasted too many years of his life searching for in all the wrong places, with all the wrong people. Each explored the other with tongue and lips, fingers and feet, and the intensity grew until the desire to somehow get inside Guapo became an obsession almost as strong as the desire to have Guapo inside him. The second desire won and he reached over to the side table for a blob of the lubricant that had greased his way into his fiancée's protesting vulva. Taking a condom from the drawer, he rolled it onto Guapo's unprotesting manhood, greased up and straddled the object of his lust. Although he had to stop several times during the descent to wait for the pain to ease, the urge remained strong and soon 15 centimeters of the man he desired was buried deep within him. He had never felt so fulfilled and sighed in ecstasy. This is what I've been missing, he whispered with a heartfelt sigh. Real intimacy. Unable to believe his good fortune, Guapo ran his hands over Khan's massive chest, flexed his hips and, as if they'd practiced, gentle thrusting achieved a natural rhythm until Guapo heaved his hips high and exquisite orgasms engulfed them both. Lying side by side in silence, they dragged still inquisitive fingers over their lover's chest and belly. The doorbell rang. They ignored it. It rang again, continuously, so Khan heaved himself reluctantly off the bed and padded to the door without bothering to cover himself. If Sebastian could do it, so could he. Who is it? Me, you bastard. You were supposed to meet me in the pub at 6 o'clock. Silence, then, hang on a tick. He raced back to the bedroom. It's Margot, my fiancée. What'll I do? Do you want to continue the engagement? Fuck no. Then put her out of her misery immediately. But. Are you the man I think you are? Khan raced back to the door, opened it, Margot barged in and he found himself apologizing to her. Back as she flounced along the hallway and into the bedroom, only to flounce right out again. There's a naked man in your bed. I know. And you're naked. I know. Come in and meet Henry. No way. Khan grasped her wrist, dragged her into his bedroom and sat her on the end of the bed. Guapo sat up, reached out a hand and said calmly, hi, I'm. Henry, Khan quickly interrupted. So? What are you doing in Khan's bed? We've just had sex. I'm in love with him. Khan stifled a shout of joy. Margot's eyes grew round and pale. But, Khan and I are getting married. Sorry, Margot, change of plan. I've discovered I prefer men for sex. But you can't. We've had good sex. You might have enjoyed it, I was bored shitless, whereas with Henry the heavens opened and I was bathed in celestial glory. More to the point, as you heard, he loves me and I love him. But, I love you, anger rather than affection was the dominant chord in Margot's shout. Then why have you never said so? Why have you never told me I'm beautiful, sexy, handsome? Have a great body, that you like my butt, that you love getting screwed by me, that you like my cock? Speaking of which, why don't you stroke and touch it? Play with it and my balls? Why don't you take pleasure in my body as well as in the presence you're always demanding? You're disgusting. What a vain creep. Wanting to be admired, to be told you're handsome. How pathetic. Yet you want me to tell you all those things. That's different, I'm a woman. Men are there to admire and women are there to be admired. And given presents and be taken care of. It's the way it always has been and always will be. Well, obviously I misunderstood the whole male/female marriage caboodle. I made a mistake. For which I apologize. Still, better now than after we were married. And thanks to your brilliant analysis of gender differences, I'm now certain I don't want to live with a woman. I want to share my life with someone who considers my pleasure, my wants and desires, my well-being. Someone who treats me as an equal. Someone like Henry. He knelt by the bedside and faced Guapo, whose eyes were luminous with delight. Equals, if he'll have me. Guapo took Khan's face gently in his hand. Equals, Khan, I don't even know your surname, but I know when I've met the best man I'm ever likely to meet. He dragged Khan onto the bed where they hugged and kissed as if alone in the room. Margot's eyes were mere slits as she stood and marched to the door, turned and sneered, Equals, this is the most disgusting thing I have ever seen in my life. Two naked men kissing as if they're man and woman. Thank goodness I discovered you're a queer. I'm going to tell everyone we know. I'm going to tell your school principal. I'm going to ruin you, Khan Achilles. You will live to regret this day. Predictable clichés seldom make for grand exits, and this was no exception. No one watched her stomp out and slam the door. Equals, well, that was easy, Khan said softly, cuddling Guapo in his arms. Equals, I'm glad I followed your advice. Guapo roared his laughter. Equals, Khan Achilles. What a perfect name. Are her threats serious? Equals, hardly. I despise her friends, and you've met the school principal. So no worries. Equals, well, what's with the Henry? Equals, you're on the run, remember? I've no idea who that cow knows. She might be buddy-buddy with your captors for all we know. Guapo was silent. Equals, sorry to be such a wet blanket. Equals, you're not. You're right, and such a breath of fresh air. You made me so happy I forgot all about that stuff. Equals, a better excuse has never been invented. Are you up to trying that last little exercise again? Khan grasped his lover's swelling erection and nodded. Equals, good man. Meanwhile, in a modest but pleasant house perched on the side of the escarpment overlooking the Great Barrier Reef, Rex Trovert was describing his son to Fee, who had shut down her computer in excitement at the news. Equals, a son. Oh Rex, that's so wonderful. How old? Equals, 17. Equals, and you're 39, so you were 21 when his mother raped you. Equals, sounds pathetic, doesn't it? Equals, not at all. It reflects reality. Just as many men and boys are sexually abused by women as the other way round, but to acknowledge it would undermine the myth that men are the sexual predators and women their prey. If men realized they are but pawns in the game of sex and procreation, they'd slit their veins. Equals, you mean we're wimps? Equals, useful wimps. Someone has to put out the rubbish and repair stuff. Well, at least my son isn't going to fall into that trap, he's gay. Equals, that's a relief. Another non-breeder. And he looks like you. Equals, much more handsome. Equals, not possible. Equals, and smarter, quicker, braver, and more popular. Equals, his father's son. Equals, and he never wears clothes. Equals, that's my side of the family. None of my ancestors wore a stitch of clothing before the Whiteys invaded. How about school? Equals, in class he wears shorts. Believe it or not, he talked old Noel into letting him swim naked at school, and today I joined him and a few dozen others at lunchtime. Equals, naked? Equals, yes. Equals, Rex Trovert. I am so proud of you. When can I meet this paragon of perfection? Equals, as soon as you like. Equals, the first time he's free he must come to dinner. Equals, you're not jealous. Equals, I'm insanely pleased. We have a child without all the nappy crappy stuff. He's done all the hard growing up bits, we can just sit back and enjoy the result. Equals, oh excellent woman. Desole couldn't sleep. Her meeting with Fartbook had been frightening. He'd all but accused her of treason, of warning Guapo and telling him to go. In vain had she protested her innocence. She was the jailer and the responsibility for his escape was hers and hers alone. There was no other explanation. Both doors had been covered when the van arrived and no one had left, therefore he must have left before Fartbook arrived. And if so, why? Escape over the back fence was ruled out, as it was so high and there was a 5-meter drop to the neighbors below. When questioned they said they'd been home all morning and seen no one. Furthermore, none of Sebastian's clothes were missing and Guapo had no clothes, so losing the house would be bad enough, but she knew too much about Mr. Fartbook and his business. She was dispensable, she knew that. Certainly, if they didn't find Guapo her role was ended and so, almost certainly, was she. Perhaps if she let him have Sebastian? He was old enough and very healthy. He'd be worth plenty to Fartbook for several years, and then she nodded to herself. Yes. That was the solution. She'd bargain to keep the house and income in exchange for Sebastian. Fartbook had often hinted that he'd be worth a great deal to him. Problem solved, she took 3 diazepam tablets and slept deeply. Reginald tossed and turned in his bed. Whenever he thought of Sebastian, which was for roughly 60 minutes in every hour, he felt uneasy. Sebastian's life had always been complicated, but now he sensed it was beginning to run amok. There was a new, brittle quality to his boyfriend's charm. He was taking more risks, not caring who knew he was gay or saw him naked. His mad mother was even more demented than he'd expected, and the equals guests and Sebastian's sexual exploits were surely dangerous. The only good thing was finding his father. Reginald decided to speak with Rex Drovert first thing in the morning and share his nebulous fears. Rodney had his head screwed on right. He'd know what to do. Reginald would ask his advice when he took Sebastian to the club next Saturday. And he should stay with Sebastian from now on, to guard him. Yes. He'd suggest it at school tomorrow. No, not suggest, he'd tell him it was going to happen, as much for himself as for Sebastian. Reginald needed to get away from his mother, whose demands that he join her church were becoming intolerable. His father was no use as he was almost never home, and when he was he kept reminding his son there was no such thing as a free lunch, and an after-school job should be considered. All very well for an entrepreneur who could sell gloves to an amputee, but what sort of work was there for a karate-addicted nature freak with an interest in poisonous reptiles and plants?